You thought that I was playing in the past. Now I'm super fast, real raw, relevant. I'm also known as super bad, with a super attitude. If you don't like it, you can book a pass and be the first in line to kiss mine. Wait a minute, what I mean is I'm a lion, not a sheep. I don't need a weakling around to try to follow me. I'm destined to be better, getting bigger every day. I don't got the patience to sit around try to play. Focus like an animal, king of the...
Are we rolling? Are we good? Can you be smarter than Elon Musk for the next 2 hours?
I can be more talkative than Elon Musk.
Dude, did you see that podcast?
Yeah, I didn't see it. I listened to it, though. I don't know if I finished. I think I'm right towards the end.
You finish it and then tell me what you think.
I'm like 3/4 or more than the way.
I couldn't stop watching it. Like, I sent Joe.
Well, he's a fascinating character.
Oh my, dude, Joe Rogan, without question. Guys, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the Revolution Podcast. This is Sean Whalen. We always just roll right into it. I'm with Court Mcgee. If you don't know who Court Mcgee is, you either knit blankets for a living.
I know a blanket knitter that was a big fan of mine.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Fuck, you just shot that down. Well, fine. The majority of blanket knitters don't know who Court Mcgee is. We're going to get to your story in a minute, but let's talk about Joe Rogan and the genius that is Elon Musk. But we just roll right into it. Court's with me today. We're going to talk about some crazy, fun, cool stuff. But, dude, that podcast, like, Joe Rogan, without question. Look, I like to think that I'm really, really good, and I am really good at what I do. But it's like fighting, right? You know that there's dudes that are legends. You're like, that guy's a fucking legend. Joe Rogan is, without question, the best podcaster to ever live. The dude interviews people and talks to people in a way. He talks to fighters, and literally Elon Musk is talking about, like, the craziest shit ever, and you can't not watch. You're like, dude, what are you doing? And it was like the funniest thing ever listening to him converse with Elon Musk about the deepest, like, craziest scientific stuff. It was so freaking dope, dude.
Or what about Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Oh, he's on another. Him and, like, Jason Silva. Do you listen to Jason Silva?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, dude. If you could, okay, so here's a question for you. If you could get stoned with anybody and do a podcast or just talk to him, who would it be?
So I'm in long-term recovery, so I wouldn't
know,
do
but
that.
just play the role. Play the role for a second.
And I've turned down a joint from Snoop Dogg.
No, for
I'm
real?
dead serious.
Dude, next time that happens, call me. Call me. I'll fill in for Court Mcgee.
Hold on,
down.
Snoop.
I'm calling Sean.
I got to get Sean on the horn.
So let's pretend that you're not in recovery, and you could smoke a joint with anybody. Who would it be?
Probably Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan? Me too. Joe's like my number one.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just like...
But like the institution of alcohol, like I don't look down on the institution of alcohol, and I don't look down on the institution of medical marijuana.
Me neither.
And I try not to have an outside opinion because I'm a big activist for recovery and about recovery and my personal recovery.
Yeah. So you've had, I mean, you've been, and I'm the same way, dude. I'm like a big supporter. I'm not going to say that I'm an advocate or what do they call it? Not an activist.
Yeah.
I'm an advocate, but I'm not an activist. I'm not out like waving marijuana flags and smoking joints in front of fucking congressmen and shit. But I'm a huge supporter and fan of like legalizing.
I have to be neutral.
Why?
Because, you know, like society told me, like my parents growing up in Utah, of course, Christian-based religion in Utah is big. I think like almost half of the state is LDS.
60, I think it's 65% of Utah total.
Yeah, I'm not sure
cumulatively
exactly.
The only reason I know that is because I watched a National Geographic show the other day called Drugs, Inc., and it was on the heroin and opiate epidemic in Utah. Oh, yeah. And they said it was, I think it was 61 or 63% of Utah's LDS. Wow. Mormon.
Okay. So I'm going to have to watch that.
It's good. But I wasn't even planning on it. I just literally sat down. I was eating some dinner. I pop on the tube for, 20 minutes to like just relax.
Yeah.
And Brent, like new episode, Drugs, Inc. And the opening scene is the temple with the tabernacle saying, angels and stuff. And I'm like, no shit. Yep. And then it's like Salt Lake City. And then it goes right into this scene of these kids using heroin and and it was an hour-long program on the epidemic of heroin and and everything here
Yeah.
in Utah.
Okay. Well, like I'm pretty versed in that. I mean, and I'm one of those. I'm one of those that got prescribed pain pills and turned to heroin. But outside of that, like part of the reason, like society tells us drugs are bad. And as a child growing up in Utah, drugs was marijuana. Like it was out of my mind completely of the illicit drugs like heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines, those things. Like, oh, I'd never seen those. I didn't know people that did that, you know. And I didn't grow up in a sheltered home either. I have family members, and my dad keeps in touch with all of the family. So we would visit family driving back to Illinois where our family farm is, and we would visit the ones that were living in trailers, drinking themselves to death, and we loved them just as much as we loved the husband and wife Baptist ministers. You know, it's like the same thing. So I grew up in a really open-minded family, but drugs were bad, and drugs are marijuana. A drug dealer is some guy from Compton.
Thug.
And that was not my opinion, but that's what was taught to me. That was what was perceived. And then at like 15, 16 years old, the first time I spark a joint, I'm with my two friends. And what we're doing is trying to increase the fun. And there was little to no negative consequences. Not saying that there can't be negative consequences, because, I mean, people get drunk for the first time, drive, and kill people. That does happen.
Yeah.
But more often than not, that first couple of times, there's no consequences. So I was told these are bad, you know, you'll do crazy stuff, people get killed. You know, marijuana scrambles your brain. The DARE program tells you just say no. And like that's what I saw. And then all of a sudden I smoked a joint with my friends, and we laughed, and we ate a whole shitload of Cheetos. And I tell that to 2,200 high school students, and I get the laugh.
Yeah.
It's the same situation. But here's the thing. Nobody said, hey, Court, you have a lot of addiction in your family, close family, relatives. Your chances are more than likely that you possibly have the disease of addiction and alcoholism inherent in your personality. So if you do decide to smoke that joint, it may affect you differently than other people. It may be so elusive that you once again have to do it, and once again have to do it, and then shortly thereafter, you're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to stop or limit the amount. You're going to try and control and enjoy it, and you're going to lose everything from it. Oh, by the way, like 2 years out of high school, you're going to die in a trailer of a heroin overdose. And I would have went, no, this is just pot. I'm just having fun with my friends. So there was no education there. Like I didn't get an education from DARE. I didn't get an education from law enforcement, and I didn't get an education from my family. It was just, no, it was bad.
It was bad.
And alcohol was bad until you turned 21. But yet I saw my dad drink it with impunity. But when you talk about somebody who has the disease of addiction, that's kind of the obsession of the alcoholic and the drug addict, is that they can control and enjoy it. See, and I couldn't control and enjoy it. From that first time, I smoked a joint, and I didn't even like it. But like it was okay, it was fun, but I thought I was fitting in. I thought I was doing what was cool. Plus, it felt cool to do something bad and get away with it. So all of a sudden I had to lead this double life. So I knew I was responsible for going to school, being there on time, and not leaving before the school day was over. So like school is most important. Like I don't care if you do shitty, as long as you show up and do your best, even if your best is shit. Like I don't care. And don't lie to me. And then that's how I was raised. Work the hardest.
But yeah, you're lying.
Yeah.
The whole time. But my kids the same thing. That's what scares me about being a dad, is I'm like,
oh yeah,
don't lie to me. And the same thing my parents said, and I lied like a motherfucker.
But I had to lead a double life.
Yeah.
So I had to still continue to control and enjoy. Slowly drinking came in, smoking weed, and then it was like, oh, well, we got these drunk pills, you know, and turns out there were benzodiazepines, like Klonopin, Xanax, which is a central nervous system depressant, so it has the same effect as alcohol. So it's like the pill form of alcohol. So I take, we call these drunk pills, and you take them, it lowers your inhibitions, you feel like you're drunk, you know, and it's like, okay, well, pretty soon it was like taking one of those, and then it was taking like two of those, and then it was taking like four of those, and then incorporating alcohol, and then taking a hit off the joint. And then it was like, okay, well, now we got to get back to school. And like that eventually spiraled out of control right after high school. But leading the double life was the hard part for me because I knew my parents expected me to go to school and do my best. So I had to continue to do that. Plus, I loved martial arts. I'd been in martial arts in some form of combative sports since the age of like 6 or 7. I'm not sure when I started, but it was like 6 or 7 years old in this karate. One of the instructors did kickboxing. He did jiu-jitsu, and he was a state placer in the high school wrestling program. He took second in state, so folk style wrestling. And so he was like, man, you're really talented at this. You're really good at this stuff. You should take it to the next level, man. You should start learning jiu-jitsu, and you should join a wrestling club. And so my dad and him talked, and they got me into a wrestling club, and I started wrestling. And like that's where that started. But so I focused on athletics. I focused on I saw a documentary on this MMA fighter guy, and I was like, that's what I want to do. So I'm going to wrestle. I'm going to do some boxing, some kickboxing, some this jiu-jitsu stuff, maybe judo. I'm going to wrestle and take it as far as I can. And then I'm going to try and pursue a career in mixed martial arts. And that's what my thought was when I was a young kid. That's what I was going to do. I had one traumatic incident happen. I got left by accident with some cousins of mine at Lagoon, this amusement park. And I got separated from the group, and I was like 5 or 6 years old. And I was left with some older cousins, and I hid behind this garbage can for like 8 or 9, 10 hours.
No shit.
And I got super sick, and like I had a lot of emotional problems and separation anxiety, fear of crowds, fear of school, fear. So the martial arts kind of helped with that, and I focused on that. And but here's the thing: it's like in that early like teenage years, you're in a time in your life where like friends are kind of the most important thing. Being accepted is important, but also to appeasing my parents was important. And so leading that double life got harder and harder and harder as high school was ending, and maybe possible career decisions, college decisions, wrestling in college. And when I left high school, I graduated with honors, and I did really well. Partly because I was good at cheating, because I was dyslexic. I'm dyslexic, and I never read a book cover to cover till I was 25. But yet, I managed to make it out of high school with honors, and not missing any school. But that double life got harder and harder to live because the drugs and alcohol took more of a role in my life. So, and then once I got injured right out of high school, I was heading over to my girlfriend's house in the middle of the night, drunk, and I got into an accident, shattered my collarbone. And a couple years earlier, I tore off a growth plate in my left elbow arm wrestling. And so I got that fixed. I got my collarbone fixed, and they prescribed me a bunch of pain pills. And I was already drinking. I was in my first year of college. I wasn't wrestling. I had lost my scholarship because of Title IX, the Women's and Men's Fairness in Sports, and there was no colleges in Utah that had a wrestling team. And so I had no idea what I was doing, and I was miserable, and I knew I was having a challenging time in school. I couldn't get through the literature. I couldn't read very well. I was just like, shit, man, I can't cheat my way through this. And you take a couple of Percocet and you drink a couple of beers, guess what? You're like, you know what? Fuck it, man. It's okay. I'll be all right. I'm okay. And that just spiraled out of control. And I mean, I'm talking somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20 to 40 arrests over the next 2 years. I mean, some gnarly charges, inciting a riot, criminal mischief, felony this, felony that, DUIs. And I just couldn't get on top of it. And then inevitably I ended up dropping out of high school. Okay, well, I'm going to go to work. And I was working at Sam's Club so I could go to college, and I hated the job, and like drugs took a bigger role. There was a guy that worked with me, and he was a former cocaine addict. He used to smoke crack. And I had an opportunity to buy my first 8-ball of cocaine. And I was like, perfect, I'll sell this to my boss because that's what a good employee does. Like, I was confused at the time, And it's like, well, I did that, but he only wanted half. And so I was stuck with the other half. And so I went into the bathroom. I snorted a little line of cocaine because I'd already been snorting pills. I thought, I'll just take it to the next level. I snorted the line of cocaine. I walked out of the bathroom, and I'm like, maybe I'll snort one more line of cocaine. So I went back into the bathroom. I snorted a line of cocaine. I came back out, started to work. I'll do another line of cocaine. And then I went back out, and I'm like, man, this feels really good. I feel really active. And, man, I'm getting a lot of work done. And I'm go back to the bathroom, and then, like, 30 trips back and forth from the bathroom, I did, like, $150 worth of cocaine in, like, 2 hours. And I unloaded more pallets than anybody ever in the history of Sam's Club. And I thought, this isn't bad. Man, I got all my work done. I was focused. I feel happy.
Dude, I'm
really
employee
good.
of the fucking month.
Yeah, woo. And then I came down from it. And then went a 2-month duration of doing lots and lots of cocaine, spending every dime I had, trying to figure out how to get more cocaine, which led into selling marijuana, which I thought, well, I don't like smoking marijuana, so at least I'll be selling it, and it's like whatever, and I could, but I couldn't manage that, maintain that. And the day before I got fired, I left, and then I hired on at another company doing landscaping, and I was loaded the whole time working for him. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, somebody was like, man, this guy's working really good. He was a friend of the company owner, and he said, hey, I've got this excavation company that I work for, and I think you'd be a good hire. We start at this wage, and it was like twice what I was making. And he's like, we drug test, and and I'm like, oh, I got to stop. And so I detoxed in my home, my mom and dad's house, for like 2 or 3 days. It was the worst 2 or 3 days of my life. And I stayed sober for about 2 weeks, and I got that job, and I worked hard, like 4 or 5 days on the job. This guy came up to me, and he was like, hey, you're really good. You can go places in this company. It's the best I'd felt because I had 2 years of misery before that. Not having a career, not finishing college, not wrestling in college, not pursuing anything other than just getting loaded and then thinking I was going to figure out how life was going to work. But first I had to get loaded to figure it out. And I got sober, and I felt better than I had ever felt. And I was working hard. I was making paychecks. I was doing really good. And I got a call from a friend of mine growing up. And he said, my girlfriend just had a baby. I have some Percocet. Do you want them? And I'm like, no, dude. I said, I haven't even drank, man. 2 weeks. I haven't used. I haven't drank. I feel good. I just got a job. I ended up getting like a couple $1 an hour raise. I was working like 60 hours a week, dude. I was making $700, $800, $900 a week. Like I felt good. I was 19 years old, and I'm like, damn, dude, this is great. And I got off work. And on the way home from work, I called that guy frantically. Hey, do you got a couple of those? I talked myself into taking them because I'd ran like a jackhammer for a couple hours. And I was sore. And I'm like, if I take just 2 of these Percocet, help me sleep, I'll feel good. So he's like, yep, I got a couple of those. So I went and I took them. And 4 months later, I lost that job. I got kicked out of the apartment I was in. I got kicked out of my home. I was homeless. And I went from cocaine, pain pills, benzos, a little bit of marijuana, drinking, to heroin. I walked into a friend's house, and he said, I noticed he was shooting up. And I was like, man, what are you doing? He said, dude, this is way better than Oxycontin. He said, it cost me $10 for a balloon. And I can shoot up 10 or 11 times of this. It keeps me high all day long. And he said, I just used a little bit at a time. And I'm like, I think I want to do it. He's like, nah, man. Just try snorting it first. He said, it's pretty powerful. And so I was like, all right. So I took in a little air solution bottle, mixed it up. It was a little black tar heroin, and I snorted it for a couple of weeks, and I didn't really like it. And a couple of weeks into it, I decided I was going to shoot up. So I was in this dude's basement, and I sat down. He strapped up a belt. I remember the vein he went in, and he just shot up this tiny little bit, dude, and it hit me. My eyes rolled back in my head, 2 tears rolled out of my eyes and hit my earlobes, and I just went, whoa. And then all of a sudden, the disappointment in my father's eyes went away. The disappointment of not completing college went away. The fear of not finding a career, the fear of possibly screwing up the possible career I was in excavation, all of that went away. And at that time, my girlfriend, who I'd been with since I was about 15 or 16, she had left me. She moved to Russia to teach English. She's like, I'm done with your shit. I'd been arrested. I had tons of charges. I couldn't function, and that heroin took all that away. And I fell in love with heroin. I said, as long as I got this, I'll be fine. So I left with my little balloon of heroin, and like 20 minutes later, I begged like 20 or 30 bucks off my mom. Oh, I need gas money or whatever bullshit. I wasn't allowed at their house, but if I needed something, like, you know, they would help me. So they, you know, gave me like 30 or 40 bucks, and I went straight back, dude, and bought a couple of balloons of heroin, and I was like, as long as I got this, I'm okay. And I got to the point where I was probably shooting up like 15, 20, 30 times a day, just periodically. And I was doing it in my ankles. I was doing it in my neck so I wouldn't have track marks, because I was still trying to manage and maintain that job. And one day, like, the party went on a little bit too long. It was time to get to work. And I was exhausted. I drove myself to work. I got about 50 miles away from my home, almost onto the job site. And I called my boss, and I made up some story about some bullshit that happened the night before. Can I take a day off? I'll be back tomorrow. And he said, yeah, you better take the day off. And I was like, oh, thank God. I'm just going to get some sleep. Everything will be okay. And then I drove back home, and right before I got home, this light turned red, and I was almost to the intersection. And I'm like, I can shoot the gap. I'm almost home. And like, I was nodding in and off, and like, I was just in a bad spot. And I made it almost like halfway through the intersection, and I looked to my right, and there was a car just right there. Boom. They had a green light. They hit the right rear of my little 99 Jeep, two-door Jeep Cherokee. Just nicked the right rear of mine. And then I rolled and on my roof, and I slid like 400 or 500 feet, kicked the door, got out, and just went, fuck, I can't do this anymore. And thank God that girl wasn't hurt, but nothing came of it other than I went to the hospital. My parents drove me to the hospital. I was okay. I was coherent. She was okay. I went to the hospital. They asked for drug tests. My parents asked for drug tests. The police asked for drug tests, but because of HIPAA, they couldn't take them. But I tested positive for everything. I mean, you name it, like it was on there, other than maybe like psilocybin or acid, you know. But outside of that, like, I had everything. I had amphetamines, cocaine, tested positive for benzos, for marijuana, for alcohol. I mean, heroin, like, you name it, I had it in my system. And I lied, ended up showing up to work like 2 or 3 days later, and I told the guy, like, hey, I got into an accident. You know, I rolled my Jeep. It's going to be challenging, but I can make it to work. I can ride the bus. I can do whatever. And I said, but I think I got a problem with alcohol. I didn't tell him about the drugs, but I said alcohol. And he said, we don't have a place for you here. If you get sober, you're more than welcome to come back. You're a great employee, but we don't have room for somebody with a problem with alcohol. Get that figured out, come back, and you've got a job. And it was the first job I ever lost. And then Chelsea left, you know, a couple of days later, and I was done. So that heroin took all that pain away. And then I'm not sure how long later, but I'm not sure when I lost the job, but it had to have been a month or two later. I got kicked out of the apartment I was in. I got into a fight with a friend of mine. We were boxing. And I got kicked out. I had nowhere to live, and no place to sleep for like 3 or 4 weeks. And that was like October, September. And September 9th rolled around. It was a Sunday. I'd called around. I had a friend that I used to teach karate to his kids, and he owned a landscaping business. And I said, hey, man, do you got a part-time job just till winter, maybe snow removal, that I could pick up and make a little side money? And he said, yeah, I can hire you. So I started working for him. And I just increasingly got worse, shooting up every day. And I was like, as long as I don't go to anything else or don't, you know, like, I'll be fine. I still drank, but I was just shooting up. And then September 9th, it was Sunday. I was in this trailer. My cousin, she allowed me to move in as long as there was no drugs involved. And she was sober at the time. She was a former meth addict, but had completely sobered up and was doing really well. And she said, you can come in as long as you don't drink or use, and nobody's allowed in the house. And I had a girl over that night, and still to this day I don't know who she is, but I had a girl over. We were just talking. And I was like, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. So I went in the bathroom, and I was do a little shot. And I did. I mixed up my shot. I had my glass case, and I had my kit, my spoon, and my syringe, and my cotton, and everything in there, my little kit. And I mixed up a shot, closed my glass case, put it on the counter, sat down on the toilet, and then I shot up. And immediately after I shot up, I got really sweaty, and I just went, oh, fuck. Because I never used to shoot up enough to nod off. It was just enough to get a little bump. Because I would do it at work. I would do it, wherever. And I had enough left over for the next morning and the next day. So I was like, I don't know, maybe it had some fentanyl in it. I don't know. Maybe it was a little bit more pure than the other shit. But either way, it was just enough to put me over the edge. And then I shot up. I got sweaty, and I just went, oh, shit. And just boom. And I fell down. And I didn't find out what happened until about 4.5 or 5 years later, after winning the Ultimate Fighter. And ESPN did a Sports Center piece, and they found the EMTs that worked on me. They found the doctor that worked on me. There was a licensed clinical social worker that met me at the hospital after I came out of the coma. My mom, who's a nurse, she was an ER nurse for a long time. She was a charge nurse. She told me a bunch of times, oh, you died. Like, how much more do you have to go through? And I mean, of course, moms are irate, so I didn't necessarily believe her. But when I woke up out of the coma, like, I thought I'd gotten to an accident, and I didn't really know where I was at or what had happened, but my chest was in excruciating pain. I felt horrible. And I mean, I had IVs, I had tubes hanging in out of me. And like, I was like, fuck, man, I got to get to work. And like, the first person I saw was my dad. And he was like, I don't think you need to worry about that. And I was just like, what the hell? And they had a friend. They had contacted a longtime friend of mine. And we got in an argument when we were like 13 or 14 over these girls or something like that. And I thought that we were still in an argument from 6 or 7 years earlier. And I'm like, screw you, man. He's like, what the hell is this guy talking about, And he's like, well, I don't know what to tell him. He's out of it. And I'd been in a coma for 5 or 6 days, so I didn't know where I was at or what had happened. And my chest pain came from the CPR and the defibrillations they did. So they broke my ribs, they broke my sternum, a lot of ribs. They do a lot of damage when people do CPR. I mean, I'm sure somebody's an EMT that's listening to this, it's like, that shit is violent. It is not. You're trying to get oxygen to the brain no matter what. That's the whole point, so I don't experience brain death. And they did CPR for like 14 or 15 minutes off and on because they would get a response and they'd lose me. They did defibrillations. But what happened is after the overdose, somebody had called 911. The ambulance showed up, but this guy that was a friend of my cousin who – she was like, we got to start CPR. And he was CPR certified, so he started CPR from my understanding. And then they got there within 2 or 3 minutes. And there was an ambulance that was like right next to the trailer park we were at. They pulled in. They started CPR. They took me out. I went to the hospital. But they did CPR for like 15 or 16 minutes. And there was a narcotics officer that got the call. He showed up, and by chance, he ended up finding the syringe in between the linoleum and the wall. I guess it had fallen behind the toilet in between the linoleum and the wall. It wasn't, like, finished well. And so that syringe was sitting there, and he snooped around, and my glass case had fallen off into the garbage can that had had the heroin, had my spoon, had all that shit in it. And so he found that, and he called, and he said, hey, it's a heroin overdose. And so they administered Narcolone, reversed the effect, and then they induced me into a coma. So after coming out of that, I talked to basically a role model with the solution. A guy had 20 years of sobriety and was a former heroin addict. Also, too, had went back to school and became a licensed clinical social worker, kind of specializing in drug addiction. And he'd worked for treatment centers. He'd moved from Southern California to, like, Park City, Utah, and he got the call. And when I came out of the coma, he came to the hospital, retired, came to the hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning to talk to me, to talk to a drug addict who had just come out of a fucking coma. And I mean, unselfishly, no profit motive, just came there to talk to me. And he drove like 40 or 50 miles from Park City all the way to Davis, like Layton, Utah. And you know, it's 40 or 50 miles away in the middle of the goddamn night, 60 years old, married, trying to be retired, decided to come talk to a drug addict, heroin addict who had just overdosed. And after 5 minutes, I knew that dude knew where I had been. I talked a little bit about what society said, like the just say no. Like, you don't think I thought about that after shooting up 40 times a day? I didn't want to live like that. I wanted to quit, and I had tried to quit. The best I could do was 2 weeks on my own. And this dude knew where I had been and offered me a solution. He was cool, he was calm, and he knew where I'd been. It's like I was stuck in this hole, right? And my dad was like, here, son, let me help you out. But he couldn't help me out. Law enforcement, they threw charges on me. They arrested me. They put me in jail. You know, it sobered me up for a little bit, but as soon as I got back, I would get loaded because I thought that was my solution. And so it's like them offering their hand down to me, but they couldn't pull me out of this hole. I went to an outpatient treatment center for 5 months, and I didn't remember any of this. Like, my family had to tell me this. I must have lost it somewhere in the
fog of drugs
and alcohol. But I lost that memory of doing that, but I made it through that successfully. And so I don't know what had happened there. Like, that guy couldn't help me out. But this guy, Patrick Mahoney, freaking like climbed down in the hole and was like, hey, son, let's get out of this shit together. And then we climbed out together. He offered me a solution. He said, listen, you're going to start calling me every day. And he said, later on, we can work together maybe professionally because I specialize in this stuff, but you need to go to drug treatment. You need like 30 days of where you don't have any drugs or alcohol in your system. And then if you get a chance, maybe you should attend some 12-step meetings or some sort of recovery group. So that way when you get out of there, you have people surrounding you that are like me in long-term recovery. Because I didn't believe that he had 20 years sober. I listened to him, but I didn't think that was possible. I thought if anybody had been through what I had been through, you had to use. I thought it was a normal thing. I thought if you were happy, it was because you figured out how to use your Oxycontin more efficiently than me. Not that you were genuinely happy, you know? And so, like, that's where I was at. And so I went to that treatment, and I experienced 3 relapses. So when I was in the treatment center, there was a psych division or like a portion that was all for psych. And there was a guy in there, and those guys had meds, but we didn't. We were completely sober. And so this dude cheeked like a Percocet and gave it to me, and I crushed it up and snorted it like 2 weeks into that thing. Without even thinking, I just did it. Like, he handed it to me. Next thing I know, I was crushing it up, and I snorted it. And then I went, oh, shit. I can't do this. I can't. And so I told on myself to the guy who ran the place, this Dr. Schroeder guy. I was like, hey, man, listen, dude. Like, he ran the treatment center. I said, I can't leave here. If I leave here, I'm going to die, man. I want to be here, but I used. Somebody gave me a pill, and I used it. And he was like, all right, you just got to tell everybody in your group that you relapsed, and ask for their forgiveness. And so that's what I did. And then I started over. I was like, okay, I'll do pretty good. And I stayed there for another like 15 or 20 days. Then I got out. 3 days after, we were doing like a sober event. And while I was in there, they did a bunch of testing. And I got tested for ADHD, which I had never been tested for ADHD, but my parents thought I had ADD, like attention deficit disorder.
It's pretty much the same thing.
But attention hyperactive disorder, attention deficit hyperactive disorder is like, I've never been really hyper. I do have a lot of energy, but I'm not ADHD. But on their test, I'm ADHD. So they suggested that I go on this non-narcotic Strattera ADHD medication. They're like, you can't take, you can't take controlled substances, man, because you'll abuse them. And so I was like, okay, but it was super expensive, and it's like, I didn't have any money. I wasn't making any money. I owed a lot of money to the state for court fines and restitutions and fucking lawyer fees. Like, I ain't trying to pay $115 a month for Strattera. Like, that ain't gonna help me. So this girl that was in recovery was like, oh, I have a prescription for Adderall. And I mean, I had snorted like thousands of milligrams of Adderall, so I knew everything about Adderall. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. That makes me really nervous. And she was like, well, I've got a prescription for Klonopin because I have anxiety. So even if you do get really nervous, you can just take some Klonopin. And I was like, okay, boom, Adderall, Klonopin. And like 2 or 3 days later, I made a call to that guy and I was like, hey man, I took Adderall and Klonopin. You know, and I have ADHD and I have anxiety. And he's like, yeah, so what doctor, can you give me a name to a doctor that prescribed you those 2 medications? And I was like, no, it was Mgee or whatever the girl's name was. Yeah, so that's a relapse, number 1. And number 2, like, that's against the law. So no, you got to start over. And I'm like, fuck. And I had enough like ambition to stay sober, and I saw enough people in those recovery groups that were like successful and seemed happy that I was like, okay, I gotta get back to these meeting things, and I gotta start hanging with these people. And so that's what I did. Like, I started back over. One thing I was suggested not to do is make any real major decisions in my first year of recovery. And that was by a bunch of different people in these groups, right? And so I didn't take that advice at all. And so I got into a relationship with a woman that I had nothing in connection with. So she was 34, I was 20. She was divorced. I had never really been in a healthy relationship other than I knew I loved Chelsea, my high school sweetheart, but she was gone. She left me. She was done with my ass. And now I'm newly sober and I'm like, wow, maybe this will work. You know, and it ended up being a purely sexual thing, and we had nothing in common. She had kids, she had a home, she had a little bit of money, and she was sober, and so maybe that's the only thing we had in common, but it was a horrible, sick, terrible relationship because I had no idea how to be a partner in a relationship. I had no idea how to be a friend. I had no idea how to do shit, man. I couldn't pay bills. I couldn't wash my clothes. I was a mess. But yet I thought I was capable of getting into a relationship with this lady. Well, 5.5 months later, I'm in Las Vegas at UFC 57, Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell 3, I think.
Dude, I was there. I was at that fight.
And I'm sitting in the back, and I had started training. I had trained in jiu-jitsu. I started training with some amateur boxers in Utah, in Ogden, Utah. I had competed in some boxing matches. I competed in a bunch of jiu-jitsu tournaments, and I was thinking about starting to compete in mixed martial arts, but I had a good base. CrossFit kind of just started at that time. It was like 2007. So there was a few affiliates here in Utah, and one of the guys I was training with was a former freestyle, like, national All-American, and he started doing CrossFit with this guy named Chris Spiller. And he was also a former wrestler, and he's a well-known CrossFitter here in Utah, in Park City, Utah. He's competed in the games. He's solid. And they were like, man, you should incorporate this anaerobic training with your MMA stuff. And I'm like, all right. And they offered me to like get a level 1 certification, but I turned it down. And I was just like, okay. So I incorporated that training. I was doing all this stuff, but it's like in Las Vegas thinking, man, you know what? My dream's coming alive. I can start pursuing this career as a mixed martial artist. Things are great. Everything's good. I wasn't taking care of my lawyer fees, court fines, restitution. I wasn't focused on I was staying sober, but I wasn't doing what people in long-term recovery do. They were attending meetings. They were doing recovery stuff. They were learning to pray and meditate and stay sober one day at a time and focus on their insides, not the outsides. And here I am in a relationship with nobody I should be with. And I'm in Las Vegas, and she has a Diet Coke with lime, and I reach over to grab it, and she pulls it away from me. And I'm like, hey, I just wanted a drink real quick. I'm thirsty. And she's like, there's alcohol in this. And she was sober at the time. So I was like, what, you relapsed? Like, that was a big deal. And I had more time than I'd ever had before since starting the sobriety thing, which is 5.5 months. And I was like, well, shit. And I remember a conversation in there while they were fighting. And I was going for Randy Couture because he was a wrestler, you know, and Chuck ended up beating him. And I was like devastated. But the guy sitting next to me was like, hey, you look familiar. And I was like, oh, yeah, you've probably seen me around doing some fighting stuff. I said, I'll be out here in a couple years, which was total bullshit because I'd never fought yet. And like, there's no reason why he would have ever noticed me. You know, he was just probably drunk and trying to make conversation. And I was totally lying through my teeth. Oh, yeah, you know, I train all the time. And you know, and like it was bullshit. But after that, we left and we ended up going to the strip club, and she bought me a Long Island iced tea. And she slid the Long Island iced tea over to me, And I like looked at it and I thought, man, this isn't a good idea. And I put it up to my lips and then I set it down and she was like, well, the alcohol touched your lips. That's pretty much a relapse. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Now, that's not her fault. That's my fault. And so I took a sip of that Long Island iced tea. And so just before having 6 months of continuous, absolute sobriety from all mind-altering substances, I took a sip of a Long Island iced tea. And like 4 days later, I ended up in Iowa with no pants on looking for meth. And I didn't get sober until April 16th, 2006, like 2.5 weeks later. I got home. I found out that girl had relapsed. She stole a bunch of jewelry from my parents. And this girl had some money. She stole a bunch of jewelry from my parents. She had, so I was in a relationship with her, but maybe she wasn't in a relationship with me. So she was stepping outside of the relationship, which, so it was just bad. It was bad. And then my parents thought that I stole the jewelry and I had no idea about any of that. And I was just like, fuck my life, And I got home and my parents, they thought I was sober and then they found out I had relapsed. And they said, you got to be out of here tomorrow. And so I went and they let me back in their house for a couple of days because I had nowhere to live. I was living with her. And I just was like, I can't do this anymore. And I had felony drug charges pending for the overdose, second-degree felony, paraphernalia, and drug charges. And I had former criminal charges, inciting a riot, criminal mischief. I had multiple DUIs. I mean, I was just like, I'm going to go to prison. And I probably should go to prison. As a matter of fact, prison to me sounded like, okay, at least my parents will know I'm safe and I won't be harming anybody. I'll be in a goddamn cell where I can't fuck anything up because that's all I was good at doing. And I just went in my parents' house, and my dad, he drank Milwaukee's Best at the time, and he had to hide his beer in his closet. And so I snuck to his room and reached around the corner into his closet, quietly slid the door open, and I pulled a Milwaukee's Best out, and they didn't hear me. And then I walked downstairs, and I knew I was getting kicked out the next day, and I was just going to sit down and just drink that beer because I thought I deserved it. And I don't even remember if I cracked the beer open or not, but in my parents' house, you can hear somebody walk across. And I mean, you got to get good at that because when you're doing sneaky shit downstairs, you got to quit it when they're coming down the stairs, right? So I heard that infamous sound of my dad walking across the kitchen floor, walking down the stairs, and I set the beer down. And I remember I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he said, son, I thought you weren't supposed to drink. And I looked at the clock, and it was 1:30 in the morning, April 16th, 2006. And I'm like, I'm fucking done, man. And I put the beer down, and I didn't take a sip of it, and I was done. That day, I was done. It wasn't the felony charges. It wasn't all the shit that I'd been through, the girlfriend cheating, not Chelsea moving away, losing the scholarship, losing the good job. None of that shit. I was it was my dad. It was the disappointment in my dad's eyes. And one of the people I look up to most in my family is my grandfather. He was a lieutenant colonel. He was a pilot. He was just the most incredible guy to me in my life outside of my dad. And I just remember looking at him, and I had this vision of my grandpa just with his big ass hands and his arms folded, looking at me disappointed. So it was my dad and my grandpa looking at me disappointed. And I just thought, I can't fucking do this anymore, man. I'm done. And I put the beer down, and that was it. That was 4,533 days ago. And I put that shit down, and I haven't picked up since.
Dude, fuck, man. I think we wrap it at that, right? I've known you for years, man, and we can talk about our relationship and how we met and all the other stuff. But what I'm fascinated by, with your story, is we're always listening, or I'm comparing, right? My story.
Yeah.
Because
that's a good way to relate.
Yeah, you're kind of okay, cool. And what I kept saying to myself after my divorce, I'm I'm good. you know, and I wasn't good. It was the lie, right?
Oh, yeah.
And feeling like you and I talked about this earlier, feeling like you're an island. Like nobody knows how bad it hurts. Nobody knows how shitty I feel.
Yeah.
Nobody knows the demons that are in my brain, how dark it is, how lonely I feel. And really, like, you know, millions and millions and millions of people do. But like what I'm really like fascinated by is what it was that actually flipped that switch, you know? Because throughout the whole time, you're like, okay, I can't do this, I'm done. But that's not really true.
No.
Like there's something there that like we
Like
say
had a
it.
contingency plan.
Yeah,
or something.
but something happened there because for me it was when I put a gun in my mouth.
Yeah.
You know, I was drinking myself to oblivion. I was doing, you know, everything, and it was like I had like zero care if I died.
Yeah.
And it was almost like testing the gods, testing the
Whatever.
universe. Like, how fucking far can I go before you actually take me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I fucking dare you. I'm gonna do this shit. I'm gonna literally like take
The only reason
as many sleeping pills as I can and drink as much as I can, almost like with a dare to see if like the universe would take me. And then you wake up and it's like, fuck. I was kind of hoping that would be the deal, right? And what's really fascinating about your story is not just like the entire thing, which is insane and beautiful at the same time, but like what it was about that one moment that was it. You know, because if you think about leading up to it, all the time you said, I'm done. Whether Chelsea leaves or this deal happens or the job or whatever. So there's always that like, all right, I'm done. And you're not really done. Yeah. And I think what's interesting is I struggle with addiction being a disease, like wondering and really believing if it is a disease or if there's this subconscious thing inside of us where we're so self-destructive, where it's like we're reaching out for help. And kids, like if you think about a child, we're a grown fucking child.
Yeah.
Like I'm a child with a beard, right? Let's call it what it really is.
Yeah, I don't think there's any adults.
Dude, I'm as freaking juvenile as anybody out there. But if you look at a child, and I've tried to really simplify life and how we do things. When you think about a little kid, why does a little kid throw a temper tantrum? Like, why do they scream and yell and throw and ba 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 ba? Really, like as I've thought about it, it's just to get attention.
Yeah.
They want somebody to be there and talk to them. They don't care if they get grounded or scolded or stare at the corner or go to your room because they already know that's what's going to happen. So it's like, I want attention now. What do I have to do to get the attention? And for me, it was like self-destructive shit. I was so alone. I was so whatever. And the parallels, like as I'm listening to you, is really similar because like you feel like nobody knows. I'm alone. Nobody knows how bad this is. And you don't know what's really at the root of that. And so it's like, all right, I'm going to try and kill myself tonight and see if that remedies the problem. If I'm gonna do so much heroin, I'm gonna snort so many lines that maybe now I'll find what it is that I'm looking for in some sort of connection by killing myself. Dude, and it's this insanely distorted thing. And for me, it was that night where I put a gun in my mouth. And I remember like waking up saying the exact same shit you said. I'm like, I can't fucking do this. And I didn't know how to change it. I didn't know what to do differently. Like I tried everything. I lied. I just cheated life. Burned every relationship that I could to the ground. The same thing you did.
I drove around in that white Jeep Cherokee with a 1911 Colt 45 and contemplated suicide for a week.
Isn't it not? You're like rationalizing in your brain. Well, if I kill myself, then this might happen.
That stopped me?
But if I don't, then this will happen. But maybe if I...
The only thing that stopped me was my Uncle Jerry had committed suicide maybe 8 or 10 years before that. And I remember that was the first time I saw my dad cry. And it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. He had found out my Uncle Jerry lived in Alaska and he had committed suicide. And I just remember how devastating that was to my dad. And I think that's the only thing that stopped me from actually doing it. Outside of, because the night that I overdosed, I accidentally I wasn't doing heroin to die.
Right.
I was doing heroin to like overcome an obsession beyond my mental control.
What do you think that obsession was? Like, what do you think that is? Do you think it was wanting attention? Do you think it was like...
No. I was far past that. I think my obsession was that I wanted to do what I thought normal adults did. I wanted to be able to go to work, get off work, drink a beer, relax with my friends, pay my bills, and just be a normal, average, what I thought was like a normal, average American. Like that's what I wanted to be like my dad. But I couldn't. Like normal, healthy people don't shoot up heroin 33 times a day just to function. Like it just did.
So if you wanted to be like him, why didn't you just do what he did?
I couldn't.
Why?
I couldn't. I think this is my only.
This is the part of the conversation. Like, dude, we might be here all freaking day. Patrick, hopefully you got enough battery life. But like, this is the part of the conversation that's really fascinating to me. Is like really getting down to like behind the why, you know, because I saw what normal was. I was told what normal was since I was a little kid, and I knew college, and I knew the deal, and I knew the kids, and the house, and the white picket fence, and the
career,
and the minivan,
retirement.
and the whole thing. And I watched a ton of people do that, and I had a lot of people around me that were there, that were like, "Hey, don't be a troublemaker. If you need any help, call me." You know, and it was almost like I was reaching out, and I'll never forget as long as I live. Like one night, just being like insanely dark, and I ate some mushrooms, and I like had a bad trip. What was really funny is my mom called me. It was actually like late afternoon. My mom called me, and I was totally shrooming, and she's like, "What'd you do today?" And I was like, "Oh, I went to church with so and so and so and so and so and so." And I'll never forget. Like I had this, like I pulled the phone away from my ear, and I'm like, none of that even happened.
Yeah.
I was like, what the fuck am I? I was like, what am I doing right now? And I came back to the phone, and I was like, Mom, I didn't really do that today. And I'll never forget. She's like, are you high? Are you high right now? And she hung up the phone.
Have you been smoking drugs?
And dude, when you're shrooming, I mean, you know, when you're in some of those hallucinogenic drugs, like you have a bad trip, like
oh yeah, I
you
stood
go down
on the top
a
of
fucking
a
rabbit
field
hole.
and threw a fucking. I threw a glow in the dark golf ball up into the stars and tried to catch it for several hours.
I literally walked out of my apartment, and I walked over to my bishop's house, which was like a couple blocks away.
Yeah.
And this was like getting late in the night. I knock on the door, and he comes to the door, and I'll never forget. Like I'm standing there, and I'm like, he's like, Sean, what do you need? And I was the trouble kid, right? Mom had moved to Cali. I was the trouble kid.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm having a bad trip. I remember telling him that. And he's like, okay, listen. He was a really cool dude. He's like, go home, hit me up in the morning. Let's sort this out.
Yeah, when you're less high,
I was like 2 blocks away from my house. Well, walking home, I got lost. I couldn't figure out where I was. And so I sat on the curb for the entire night and watched the sunrise. But it was that like thinking to myself, Mom knows, but I'm kind of glad she does. It's like that reach out for help. Like, where am I really at? You know what I mean? Like,
plus,
I wasn't really having any
haven't
fun.
Ever taken mushrooms like tracers?
Oh, dude.
You have all this.
It was a crazy evening.
You start thinking about things and go down this crazy wormhole.
I mean, because doing drugs, there is, and anybody says otherwise is full of shit. Like getting high is fun. Like there really is in that space. If you really think about it, like that feeling, doing heroin.
Yeah, losing ambitions.
Nothing matters, right? Yeah. And there is pleasure in that. And I can see why people get addicted to it. But I was running. I was running from confusion. I was running from life. I was running from me because I didn't really know who the fuck I was. I was raised in a single parent home. Dad was basically a fucking dick. And it was kind of like, I don't know who I am. I don't know where I am. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Normal. I don't want normal. But normal, what if you didn't do normal, you're this fucking outcast. Yep. And so I was like, well, fuck all of you. I'm going to go do drugs. And I felt normal doing drugs because all my druggy friends were like, yeah, you're normal. You're like us. Yeah. I'm like, well, dude, you're 25 years old sleeping on a fucking couch. That's not normal, right? Yeah. And so I'm intrigued by like what that night was. Like what, as you're sitting there looking at your dad, and I know your dad is a freaking rock star. Like, what was it about that night that was different than the other nights? Was it that you just got to that breaking point where you knew you couldn't, like you would die? Or was it like, I'm over it?
Recovery, and I'd seen enough successes in recovery to know that that's the pathway I needed to take, or at least that was like the number one option.
Better option than where you were.
Yeah. Oh, definitely a better option. Like, prison is what the option was. Like that very next day, like Monday morning, I called the district attorney at the time in Davis County, Utah, and her name was Kathy Morris. And I said, I need to go to prison. I left the state. I've been through multiple states. I've done this drug. And then she stopped me. Stop right now. And she said, make it here Friday, 1 o'clock, sober. Don't use, don't drink, no matter what. We're going to talk. And I was just like, ugh. You know, like, and then my next thought was like, there's no way I can make it till Friday. And my dad talked to me that morning, and he's like, son, you know, what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And I just was like, dude, I messed up. I had one drink, Dad, and I had to have them all.
And I remember that story. You telling me you woke up like in Iowa.
Yeah.
Like, how do you go from Vegas to Iowa and not know how the fuck you got there?
That lived in Iowa. My best friend growing up, and his dad had an aneurysm. He was a military guy, and my friend, he was a military brat, so he moved around. So we were in like 3rd and 4th grade together, and then he moved away to Japan. He moved to California. He did all these different places, and then his dad had an aneurysm, and he had a stepmom, and this stepmom and his relationship were not good. And so he moved back with a grandmother and grandfather that were in Iowa. And so he was back there, and then his dad ended up making it out of aneurysm, but basically kind of like it was severely handicapped and needed to be taken care of 24 hours a day. He needed somebody to watch him, to help him. Like, he could function, but he wasn't supposed to make it out of it. And so he moved there to Iowa, and they were all living together. And basically my friend was out there, and he had got his life together. He got sober on his own. Like, he was working a good job. He purchased a home, and he was helping take care of his dad. And he had all of his stuff out here. And he called me and said, hey, would you rent a rider? You know, like, would you rent like, and bring out all my dad's stuff? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So it was like this, I'm going to be a good guy and take it out there. Well, I wasn't old enough to rent one. So I had the girlfriend that I was mad at and that I'd been drinking with for 2 weeks, you know, or for a couple of days at that time. Hey, will you rent it? You know, and then we'll drive it back. And I was just hammered all the way there. I made an ass of myself. He's like, dude, what the hell's the matter? Because he knew I was sober. He knew I was supposed to not be drinking. Yeah. Like, he'd talk to my family. He was like, what are you doing, man? And I was just super hammered, like way worse than ever before. I'd, you know, like 30, 40 beers a day, just drinking all day, just hammered. And then he had some friends out there that were like rough that he had separated himself from, but I knew him because I used to go back there every summer, and we used to go fishing and camping. And he had friends that started, you know, abusing drugs and alcohol and whatever else. So he had some friends out there that, or acquaintances that had done meth, and I knew where they lived. And so, like, I'm like, well, I'm going to go for a walk. And they're like, dude, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, you know? And he's like, you're not going for a walk. You need to go to sleep, bro. And, like, I was just miserable. And I was like, man, maybe some meth will help, you know? And so those guys took my pants from me thinking that I wouldn't leave the house. And so I'm like, well, I'm just going to go and take a whiz or whatever. And I snuck out the window, and I went all the way to this dude's house in the middle of the night in Iowa, in this little tiny town.
With no pants on.
With no pants on. And I was going to that house for meth. And, like, my friend was trying to help me. He was trying to be a good guy. He was, like, trying to be like a parent, you know. He's like, what the hell's the matter with this guy? You know, I was just a wreck, dude. Yeah. And then I ended up over there, and I was like trying to work my way into getting some meth, and, you know, they ended up showing up, and they were like, dude, what the hell are you doing over here, bro? You're naked, you're in your underwear, what are you doing, man? And I was like, well, I don't even know what you're talking about, man. You know, like, just over here hanging out, you know. And, like, so it wasn't them.
It's crazy, but it's funny. It's like, when you look at it now, you laugh at some of it.
Oh, of course. Dude, you want to talk about telling your bishop that story or telling your mom that story? I was driving home, and I was in this gnarly blaze. Like, I had done so much cocaine and a bunch of Oxycontin, and, like, I was messed up, and I was done with work for the day, and I had met this girl, and I was going over to her house, but I didn't want her to know that I was doing drugs, so I kept the drugs at my house, plus I didn't want to have the drugs on me. And I had been drinking, and I think it was like a Saturday or a Sunday or something like that. Well, I had some cocaine at my house, and so I was going over to her house to, like, hang out and then see about maybe, like, going and doing something that night or whatever. And then I would drive back home. Oh, I'm doing laundry at my house. And I would drive back home like 2 or 3 miles, and I'd do a couple lines of cocaine, and then I would drive back. And then, I got to go change the laundry over, and I'd drive back. And this girl was probably like, what in the fuck is this guy's doing? But, and at the time, like, I didn't really care. I don't even know how I met her. I don't even know what, but either way, on the way back one time, I came around this corner, and like, I was going a little fast, and I noticed a cop was there, and it was kind of like this spot where they used to speed trap people all the time. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to get pulled over. And at the time I had a bunch of tall boys that I had drank that were open container that were in the back that I drank and then thrown in the back. And I'm like, if I get pulled over, I'm screwed. And so I was driving really fast, and I thought, like, this is kind of like your funny story. I thought, like, I'm going to pull over next to him before he can pull me over. And I knew he was going to pull me over, or maybe not. I don't shit. Who knows, right? So I pulled over, and I was like, "Hey!"
Try to bullshit, dude. I did that so many.
Dude,
times.
I made a story up. I told him, "Oh, hey, I just live down the street," and I said this guy was beating on this girl, and blah blah blah. And he's like, okay, well, I'll follow you over there." And I think he got suspicious. And
we
so
think we're trying to be homies and funny, like he's not gonna know I'm hammered.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
You're fucking hammered.
And I was hammered, dude, and it was like late, and I'd been using all day, and I drove over to my apartment, and I got out, and when I got out, beer cans fell out, and then he was like, "Hey," and I like ran into my house, and it was just this mess, and I ended up getting arrested and getting my second DUI that night, and I don't even know if I would have got arrested or not. Like,
you probably could have driven right by him.
But I made up this bullshit story, and it's like,
we think we're smart in the moment. Do you think, this all? Where did we even come on with this? We were talking about weed. I think we were talking about like legalizing weed. Do you think addiction is a disease, or do you think that you were in a really, really, really crazy, insane, dark place that you had no idea, like, where the fuck you were, where you were going? Or do you think it's a legitimate disease? And here's why I ask that, because I have a very addictive personality. My father's an alcoholic. My grandfather's not. I mean, I was raised in an Irish Catholic family. I was drinking when I was 10 years old. Like, my grandpa would send me to the fridge. This is when Budweisers were in the grenades, the little round grenades, right? And he'd open it and he'd hand it to me, and I would take the head off of it.
Yeah.
So that's like, I was raised like
we used to
10 years old. We'd go. My dad wasn't a beer guy. He never drank beer. He was liquor. And so we'd go into the liquor cabinet. We'd take Seagrams. We'd take this, and we'd pour a bunch into like a cup, and we'd go out and hide in the bushes. We had this little fort in the bushes. We'd steal cigarettes from my grandma, and we'd go out back. But do you think really, like, I think back about that period of time for me, and it was just, I was angry. I didn't know, like, I was so fucking angry at everything. My dad and my parents' divorce, and like, I have as addictive as a personality as anybody, right? Like, do you think you're an addict? Like, is it a disease, or do you think you're just in such a dark place that was what made you feel better?
So after having almost 12 and a half years of sobriety, so I have over 12 years of continuous sobriety, so no drugs, no alcohol, no mood altering or mind altering substances, and through working a program of recovery, being surrounded by people in long-term recovery, going through all the things that I've been to, being to all these different treatment centers, speaking at these treatment centers, all the stuff, me, like that guy, Patrick Mahoney, that I talked about, that unselfishly came in the middle of the night to talk to me because he knew I was a heroin addict and was struggling. And the countless times that I've done that, reading literature on addiction, reading literature, spiritual literature, like guru literature, like, I find that the disease of addiction was inherent in my personality long before I took that drink or drug, because, and this is the only reason why I say that, it's because a lot of those things that I did at young age are characteristics that a lot of those people that I surround myself in long-term recovery have.
Yep.
Only thing is I think I passed that point of where I could come back. Like maybe if I would have got into a college and wrestled, maybe I could have made it through college with a degree. And maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe if I didn't shatter my collarbone and get prescribed pain pills and mix it with the alcohol, maybe if I didn't pass that point. But at some point, I passed the point of no return to where I could not control my drinking and using no matter what it was. And alcohol was kind of my main thing. And the cocaine, the meth, the Adderall, the pain pills. Like, I thought pain pills were the best thing in the world because I could catch a buzz, but nobody could smell it on me. And so it helped me regulate my drinking. Because then I wanted to be like my dad. So when I got off work, I could have a drink. But for me, I wasn't even legal to have a drink. So I had to find somebody to buy it or I had to steal it. And there's a process in that. You know, and figuring out a way to use that to where I could function, like just enough Xanax to catch a buzz, to not have as much anxiety, just enough pain pill to like get rid of my back pain for running a jackhammer for 10 hours, and then 3 or 4, you know, tall boys, just to like cool down the night.
We find like the balance in that.
And there was never a balance though.
Yeah,
like I never
it's the most
had
fucked up
enough or the right kind ever. But I think that's because I have the disease of addiction inherent in my personality. And I think I had it long before I took that drink or drug. I think it's a mentality. I think it's – and then I look at my family.
Here's what's interesting,
like
though.
Grandfather, first and second cousins. Like there's a lot of addiction in my family.
Yeah.
And so it runs in my family.
Yeah.
And
same with mine.
Yeah.
But that's what's interesting. Dude, I don't think there's any right or wrong. And I've read –
yeah,
look,
there's
I've read literature from you know, this with addiction and personality. And anybody listening to this, I guarantee you're going to get comments of people saying, "Oh, it's this," and check this link. And everybody's got a link, right? But like, what's really fascinating to me.
But if everybody's wrong, nobody's right.
So who's right? Who's wrong?
Yeah.
Everybody's different. But this is what's interesting: is our stories are very, very similar in the sense that, you know, it was a period of darkness. Mm-hmm. It was a period of anger, frustration, resentment, sadness. You know, and yours was the treatment and then the relapse and the whole thing. But what's really interesting is that one night you come down, your dad's there, you've got the beer, I've got the bottle of Jack and a Ruger P95. And it was like somehow, some way, the almighty God, the universe,
whatever higher power
didn't let me pull that trigger. And somehow, some way, like through all of that shit, you didn't die.
Yeah.
And in that moment,
well, I guess technically I did.
Well, technically you did. Yeah. In that moment,
modern medical science,
you look at your dad and you're like, "That's it." And like since then, there's no return. That was it. No. Even after all the treatment, even after all of the shit, it was that moment. Even when you were back relapsed, and for me, it was story after story, divorce, wealth, made millions, lost millions. I was running, I was hustling, I was grinding. I lived the story. I did what I was supposed to do. I did what I was told. Like you say, I was trying to be like my dad. I was trying to be normal. I was trying to be the dude who had the house with the white picket fence and the wife and the things and the Disneyland trips and the fucking SUVs and the whole thing. And it was that one night where it was like, I can't do this. And what's really interesting is that was a conscious decision. And since then, like I went on a completely different path. And since that night, you went on a completely different path. Even still being a quote unquote addict, even still having, for me, addictive personality traits of my dad, my grandfather. They were all fucking drunks, dude. My whole family was drinking and shit like that. And I think that's a really fascinating conversation and something very, you know, notable to talk about, the power of that consciousness. Do you think that you were... I felt like I went so deep to the point that I wanted to take my own life. And it was like I had felt everything else and done everything else and been mad at everybody else and felt the resentment and felt the remorse of the divorce, and I failed my kids, I failed my family, I failed my mom, I failed my dad, I fucking failed everything. Like I was given this deal, I fucked it all up. I always referred to myself as like the bull in the china shop, and I just couldn't, everywhere I turned, I was breaking shit. But, you know, at that moment, it was that decision, it was that conscious decision. And when you think about like the mental capacity,
that was my bottom.
Yeah, and that's I think everybody has their own bottom, and some are darker, some are deeper, some you have to put a needle and literally physically die, some you have to put a gun in your mouth. But it was like, do you think that was the bottom for you, and that's what made that decision and saying no more
I
easier,
think that was my
or
bottom,
do you think it was like
a set of circumstances helped me with the criminal justice system? A set of circumstances.
Because that lady, if you think about it, today, even back then. Let's just throw your fucking ass in the clink, dude. You've lied, you've stolen, you've not paid your shit. It would be really fucking simple if you think back to how many people came in your space and my space. That bishop who was like, should have called the cops and been like, he's frying his balls off. All of the shit that I did, all the drugs that I did, the times that I drove and I shouldn't have driven and the whole thing. All of those things kind of lining up and leading up to that like moment. Because for her to be like, no, get your ass here was such a fucking help. Because you're begging, throw me in jail,
what I
right?
couldn't see in myself.
And did you see in yourself in that moment like that you had a possibility of something different when you looked at your dad?
I was just like, I just knew something had to change. I knew I could not drink, not even once. I knew I couldn't even have a sip of a Long Island iced tea. I just knew it. And then the crazy thing was, he's like, well, I've got a friend who owns a plumbing company, and he's willing to talk to you. I know he was looking for an employee. I don't know if he still is, but I can give him a call. And I was like, I don't know, Dad. Like, I mean, I had to find a place to live, you know? And I'd been homeless for a little while before, so I thought maybe that was the next thing. I didn't know. I didn't really care. I was just, oh, man, I can't, whatever. And he said, okay, well, he got an interview on Wednesday. So I went into that guy's office. And I sat down, and he's like, all right, tell me about yourself. And I was like, dude, I'm like 2 days sober.
You don't want me to tell you.
I said, I just got out of drug treatment a couple of months ago. I had some sobriety, but I relapsed. I have a ton of criminal charges. I attend these 12-step meetings, and I'm trying to stay sober, but I literally have like 2 days of sobriety. And he's like, great. You're hired. I like the honesty. And I'm like, what in the fuck? Like, what did that guy say? And so I left with a job, but I was uneasy because I was confused because I was thinking like
it was different.
Prison was my option.
Yeah.
Plus I thought there was a possibility of me going to prison, and I thought that was probably the best option at that time. And I was like, but I got to meet the district attorney on Friday at 1:00. And so like Thursday rolled around, and I went to work for my first day. And then the second day I was like, well, I need to be to the district attorney's office to talk to her about what I need to do about these charges that are pending. And I showed up, he let me off of work. I went in there, and I was just like, so what do we do? You know, what am I doing? She's like, well, what have you done? You know, and I told her, well, I got a job. I worked yesterday and I worked this morning, and he let me off to come visit with you. And she was like, all right. And then, so I asked for prison, right? And so there's a program, I believe it's called NUC, or clinical consultants and NUC. So it's guys
NUC is a bad acronym, by the way.
Yeah. So
somebody needs to redo that.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
So it's guys fresh out of the state penitentiary, the Utah State Prison. And they're like, it's like reintubation back into
like
society.
A halfway house
so
kind of deal.
Halfway house.
Yeah.
And then they attend this meeting every Friday night for several hours, and then they have to meet there every week and like check in. And she said, I want you to attend that, and then I want you to do 2 self-help groups, like a 12-step meeting or something else. And then she wanted me to go to like victim awareness or anger management. And so I had those things. And she also too said, I'm going to set you up on UA's piss tests. So I'm going to give you a color, and then you're going to call, and every day, if your color pops up, you've got to go pay $10 and do a piss test. And other than that, that's what you have. It's a plea in abeyance. I'm going to put this charge, and discharge in a plea in abeyance, and you have to follow this. If you screw up one time, you're done. And I was just like, okay. And so I asked for prison, and then I ended up in front of a bunch of former prison inmates. And I was scared. I didn't say anything, especially the first time I went in there. I was just really quiet, and they were like going around introducing themselves, and I was like, oh, I'm Court, and nobody knew me. And After being there for a couple of weeks, I was like, holy shit, I'm like every one of these guys. I've done the same things. I've done everything. The only thing I haven't done is prison time. And I had served maybe like 4 to 5 months total in jail because I'd been arrested a lot.
Yeah.
I had weekends. And,
Yeah.
I mean,
I had a couple weeks in county.
Yeah. So I'd been locked up in county jails.
Yeah.
In quite a few different counties for different stuff, you know. And I was like, but it helped, man. It helped listening to their stories. I got to a point after a couple of months, like where I thought I really dodged a bullet, man. Like I didn't need to serve a bunch of prison time. Maybe if I just keep staying sober, you know, I contacted a guy in that 12-step program and I started talking to him regularly. Just working through life stuff, talking every day, being consistent on calling him and telling him where I'm at and what I'm nervous about. And then I showed up to work every day. And that's what I did, man. I'd call, I'd go do my UAs. I would, you know, anytime I had to take off to go to classes, they would let me off. And then I just focused on work. And then I got to a point where I was like, damn, well, maybe I can become a commercial plumber. Maybe I can be like my dad. You know, and like I remember one of the guys was like smoking weed on the job and I was too scared to tell him like to not do it around me, but I was nervous about relapse and I was scared to death. And then we started doing these overnight remodels in Smith's and they do it overnight. So when the stores close down, you come in and you do your plumbing. And my first one was like in West Valley or something. And I remember we were in the pharmacy. And so we were working and I had a coworker with me. We were digging a trench, like doing some pipe work, like roughing in a new toilet or something. And the pharmacist was there and he was like, hey, you know, can I take this sink? And I was like, well, I can ask my boss tomorrow. And then tomorrow night when I come back, when you're here, I'll see if you can take it or not. And he was like, oh, okay. You know, and I asked my boss the next morning or whatever. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. So the next night I go to work and he's like, hey, what'd your boss say? And he was a pharmacist and he was staying there because they didn't have any there was no cameras. That's why the pharmacist was there. He had to be there with us all night long while we were working to make sure we didn't take medication, to make sure everything was safe. So I'm digging this trench or whatever. And I was like, hey, my boss said you can take that sink. And he's like, oh, great. You know, he said, all right, I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm going to take this out to my truck. And I was like, okay. And I'm just digging. You know, and like my coworker went out for a cigarette break or to grab some pipe fittings or something, you know, and he left and like I sat my shovel down and I sat down and I looked across to me and there was a wall of liquid Loratab. And I was like, and it was my first like test.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, I could get away with this. And I just thought, holy shit. And I like stood up. And I'm like, just keep digging. And like that dude couldn't get back fast enough.
Yeah.
As soon as he got back, I was like, oh man, good to see you, bro.
You're my best
so
friend.
good to see you, man. And I kept going and I didn't relapse that day.
Yeah.
Like that was my first test, you know? And my second test was like, the guy's smoking weed. Hey, do you want, you know, no, I can't. I've got criminal charges and I can't do that. And I got piss tests, you know? And I knew I couldn't use, you know? And so like, that was really tough. But also too, I was suggested by that guy that I looked up to in that 12-step program to do service work. He said, hey, is there some service work you can do? And I went back to the high school that I wrestled at and I donated my time as an assistant wrestling coach. And after my first practice, I thought, I got to compete. And so like work came second while I was walking around on jobs doing chin-ups and like running, you know, like putting all kind of carrying pipe around, doing extra work, like getting like all I cared about was becoming this athlete. And so I was doing the UAs, I was paying back court fines and restitution and all the things for the charges that I had. I was following the rules, doing what I was doing. And 6 months into this thing, like work was kind of challenging, life was kind of challenging because it's the first time I experienced any of that stuff sober. But I had a friend that I was kind of going through it with, so I was talking to him regularly. But I had a friend call me, the same friend who offered me the Percocet when I was sober that first time. And he's a kid I grew up with since before grade school. Like his mom babysat me and we babysat him. And he called me and he said, hey man, I want to get sober. You look like you're doing good things. And I said, okay, well we can go fishing together. Just don't use or drink. And maybe we can go to one of those 12-step meetings. And so I picked him up. We missed the meeting or whatever, went to Cabela's. We got some fishing tackle. And he went into the bathroom and he came back out. And when we got into the car, I noticed he was like sniffing. And he used to snort Xanax all the time, and I knew that. And I knew he went in there and he snorted some Xanax. And like 5 minutes into the car ride, he was like, high. And I'm like, pull over, dude. He's like, for what? And I'm like, pull over, bro. You are loaded. And I said, you're going to get us in an accident. Pull over. And he's like, fuck you, man. Like, it's my prescription, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, dude, pull over the goddamn car. I don't want you to kill us. And finally, like after some arguing, he pulled over, we switched, and I drove. And at the time, I don't think I had my license yet, but I didn't want to
die.
I didn't want to die. And so I drove that guy home in his car, dropped him off, and he was messed up. Like, I think that dude snorted a couple milligrams of Xanax because he was like slurring his speech, and not bad enough for me to like take him to the hospital. Like, I'd been around people who took way too much, but like bad enough to where he needed help getting into his house, and he was still living with his parents. And so I carried him into his house. I sat him down and I was like, dude, I told you you're not supposed to use around me. Like, and he's like, man, you're the drug addict, not me. And dude, you called me for help, man. We were trying to go fishing sober. And then you're high, dude. You're high as a kite. Well, he was supposedly sober, and he told his family that he was sober, and his mom overheard this conversation, and she got mad. So when I left the house, she got into an argument with him and told him, you're out of here, whatever. So he did like I did with that cop. He made up a story. He said, Court pushed me. He did this. He did that. He punched me, and like he's irate and blah, blah, blah. And so he said, I'm going to call the cops because he scared me to death, and I think he's going to come back and beat us up, Mom. And like he made up this crazy story. And I didn't know any of this happened other than like arguing. I was just trying to help, and like, so I left. I went back home. I had moved back in with my parents for a couple of weeks before I found a place to live with this cop, and I was going to move in with him because I thought that would help. And I was like back home. And I took all my stuff out of my, like whatever. I got to my house, and then this cop shows up. The same cop who was responsible for me being alive today. The same cop who gave me a DUI that night that I lied to him and said I saw somebody beat up. And he looks at me and he says, Court, I haven't seen you for like 6-7 months, dude. What the hell's the problem? And I was like, well, what do you mean? He was like, were you at this kid Brady's house? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I'm sorry, man. I'm parked down the street. I have to arrest you. But we can make this calm. Call whoever you need to. If you need to call your boss or you need to talk to anybody. But you're under arrest for burglary.
Burglary.
And I was like, what? And like my heart stopped. And I immediately thought the plea in abeyance. Because you're talking multiple felonies. Inciting a riot, criminal mischief. I had a number of DUIs. I had like, you want to start compounding charges?
Yeah. Well,
just the second-degree felony alone and the possession charge was good enough to put me away for whatever, 27 months or whatever the second-degree felony is, if you get charged to the fullest extent without a plea bargain. And if I'm in a plea in abeyance, that means that I get charged to the fullest extent of all of the charges that are on the plea in abeyance. Yeah. And so I just was like, oh, my God. And at the time, I had reunited with my high school sweetheart, Chelsea. She came back from her little stint in Russia teaching English, and we met in a bowling alley, and I was sober, and she thought, he's everything I want minus the alcohol. And so we started dating again, and she was pregnant with my first son, and we knew that. And I just like went, what have I done? Like, I did nothing wrong. This is the first time I've been arrested, and I didn't do anything wrong.
Like the first time you were actually really trying to help somebody, and you get...
Yeah.
So what happened?
So I called my boss, and I said, hey, man, I'm getting arrested. I don't have any... I didn't do it, which is what I said every other time.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, man. I'll talk to you when I can talk to you. Thank you for the opportunity to let me work for you. I appreciate everything. Went to jail, and when I got out, I talked to the district attorney, and... I don't know, the charges were filed for burglary, and like a couple of weeks, maybe 5 or 6 weeks after that, the city court dropped the charges because his story was so weird. And I was like, oh, thank God. Then the state picked it back up. We're going to prosecute this guy. And I had a public defender because I couldn't afford, and my parents weren't, they were done. Like, they'd put me through treatment. God knows how much money they spent trying to keep me alive. And I got this public defender, and he said, dude, you're going to have to plea bargain to lesser charges, man. If you get convicted of this, you're going to go away for like 15 fucking years, bro. Like, you will not see the light of day till your mid-30s, at least. And I was just like, I'm supposed to be living honest. I was honestly trying to help him. Fuck that. I'm not plea bargaining to shit, dude. I didn't do anything. And if they find me guilty, then they find me guilty of trying to help my friend who is dying. So you know what? If they find me guilty, okay. But I'm going to be honest this time. And so I decided not to. So one thing led to another, man. Like, this kid showed up one day, and he's like, hey, man, I heard about the thing with Brady, because I got out, and I was going back to work, and I was, like, trying to build this case or whatever. Or the public defender was, well, do you have any witnesses of anything? And I'm like, no, man, I told you what I did. I didn't even write a goddamn statement because I knew what happened. That's exactly what happened. I was suggested, the only thing I did wrong was I was suggested not to hang with people I used to hang with. Because you can't give that which you do not have. I was not recovered. I had not recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of alcoholism and drug addiction. I had not worked that 12-step program. I had not had enough sobriety. I had nothing to fucking offer that guy.
Yeah.
I should have been like, dude, I don't know how to help you, but maybe come to one of these meetings or something. You know, like that's what I could have offered. But instead, I wanted to be this hero. Oh, look at my life. I'm doing so well, you know, and I wasn't, man. My insurance on my car was like $335 a month for liability. I was paying for piss tests. I barely had enough money to eat. I was driving an 89 Toyota Camry that was like running on 3 cylinders. I mean, like, I had nothing, dude. I had nothing to offer that kid. So this kid comes up and he said, man, he told me about it. He told me that you and all your friends showed up to his house and broke his door down and beat the hell out of him, busted up all of his stuff with a bat. And I was like, wait, what? I was like, dude, would you write that statement down? And he's like, sure. So he wrote down a whole statement. And then another friend of his, because we used to go to the same gym, came up and said, oh, dude, I heard about the incident that you came sliding in sideways in your car and drove over his curb and broke his door down. And I was like, hey, would you write that? Dude, I got 10 different statements of 10 different stories. And what it was a drug and alcoholic-induced confusion because he was under the influence. Yeah. And so maybe he thought that was what happened, but that's not really what happened. He didn't want to get kicked out of his house, and I don't blame him. That was his safe spot.
You're in this spot where you're actually doing good. And this is what's fascinating about this dude is I can't even tell you how many times you get on that track and the universe conspires. This is what I tell people with Lions Not Sheep, with coaching, with everything. I'm like, look, you come out to Utah and you work with me. It's like anything. The same thing they tell you when you go to your rehab, you go home. Everything's the fucking same at home. People are the same. They're the same assholes with the same problems, with the same addictions, with the same stories, with the same everything. And here you are trying to chart this new course with the same old people. And it's like, it's impossible. In my opinion, it's one of the hardest things to do because you literally, we talked about this earlier, you're doing that because you want to help. You know, you're wanting to help, and it actually can hurt you. And I talk to people often about like the social contracts, you know, and Court's the guy who's using and he's doing this and he's doing this. And this is how Sean is.
Dude,
and
I needed to go to meetings.
It's crazy.
I needed to go to work and I needed to go home, and that's it.
Yeah.
I needed to pay fines. I needed to wash coffee cups. I needed to do my laundry. I needed to be a partner with my girlfriend who is pregnant with my son.
The basic stuff, and here you go trying to help somebody. What did you take away from that? What did you learn from that? Because I know you now, and this is what's interesting is you are that guy. Like, you're very, very, very kind-hearted. I've seen you for the last 10 years.
Time, I had went completely undefeated. That was my first year of competition, 2007. I had fought 6 times and went undefeated. And then I got offered to fight Jeremy Horn. Yeah. December 1st, 2007. I was still smoking a pack a day of Marlboro Blend 27s. I was facing like at least 15 years in prison. Like, I had a baby on the way. I was unwed, which I was getting a lot of pressure from her family. Little to no pressure from my family because they were worried I was going to prison. And I had felony, every charge you can imagine. And I'm looking at going to a jury trial. And you know what? I wasn't worried about anything. I was focused on training. And I thought, you know what? I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know how this is going to pan out. But things started to relax. We put together this case or whatever based on those guys' what they said, their statements. And then we just waited to our date. It got pushed back a couple of times. And then eventually, I think it came right around my birthday that year, which is December 12th. So I was scheduled to fight Jeremy Horn. And a week before that, they had Ultimate Fighter Season 7 tryouts. And I wasn't even supposed to leave the state. I booked a flight, and I thought, this is my chance, right? And so I went out. I did my tryouts. I made it to the interview. And I was like, oh, this is my last shot. I've got so much stuff on my plate. Like, I got to make it to the UFC. And they were like, yeah, fuck this guy. He's an idiot. Everybody sounds like this guy. And so they didn't ever call me back or whatever, right? And I thought I had a poster of me getting ready to fight Jeremy Horn. I thought it was my ticket in. But looming on the back was I was facing 15 years in prison like 2 weeks later. And then a week and a half later, I was supposed to fight Jeremy Horn. So I was in the midst of this training camp. And I thought it was a great time for me to ask my boss, who let me come back to work with him, can I have Fridays off so I can train twice on Fridays and spar? Because everybody spars in the morning. And he's like, fuck you. You need to go get a new job if you're going to go take days off. I've already worked with you for this whole year. Like, no. And that was October 26, 2007. Facing all those charges, all that shit going down. I was just like, all the pressure, like, you got to marry this girl, you know, like me, like thinking, fuck, I'm a piece of shit. Like, oh my God, like what? And that day I decided to quit smoking. So I crushed up my pack of cigarettes. I do not like littering. I'm a big advocate of not throwing your shit on the ground. Put it in a goddamn garbage can. And I threw my pack of cigarettes out of my car with conviction on I-15. And I never picked up a cigarette since then. But I went home, and a week later, I fought Jeremy Horn.
I remember that, dude. That was right when we met.
Yep.
It was right around when we met.
2 weeks later, I was on a jury trial with my life on the line, dude. Not really, not life sentence,
Your
but
freedom.
long-term,
Yeah.
my freedom.
Yeah.
So now here I am. I have a kid. I have a pretty good relationship. I have a job, which I just quit to become a professional athlete. And now I'm going on a jury, in front of a jury of my peers, to plead my case of innocence against something that I was innocent to. I laid a hand on him in carrying him up to his room, but I'd never wanted to hurt him. I wasn't trying to get him kicked out of his house. All I wanted to do was give him a little bit of what I had been given, which was recovery. And on that jury trial, they put me on the stand, and I told them that same story. I said, this is exactly what I did. And then they put him on the stand, and then all my witnesses went up, and they told all their various stories. And then he lost it up there. I think he was still under the influence. And he was like, oh, you know, he changed his story multiple times. His mom was trying to help him, but like she couldn't get her story straight because she didn't know what had happened or what had not happened. And after like 30 minutes of deliberation, they found me not guilty on all charges, and I walked out free. And I just stood up and I said, if you find me guilty, I want you to find me guilty of trying to help but not being able to help. I'm completely sober today. I've got a sponsor in a 12-step program that's in this audience. I have my girlfriend who's pregnant with my son. I'm trying to become a productive member of society. I've paid all my court fines and restitution. I've had hundreds of clean UAs. I've paid for all of them. I'm trying. I said, but I did not enter his house with the intent to harm him. The only thing you could convict me on is maybe I should have taken him to the hospital. But outside of that, I didn't do it. And I sat down. That was it. And then they found me not guilty, man. And I walked out of there and I was like, holy shit. Back to training.
Do you think everything, because that's about the time that I met you.
Yeah. That's
you know,
about the time
when Throwdown opened was right then. And do you think that I look back now and I realize one of my favorite quotes is from Thomas Monson. You are who you are today.
A former
the former prophet of the Mormon Church.
Prophet of the Mormon Church, yeah.
You are. It's a brilliant quote. You are who you are today because of the choices and decisions you made yesterday.
I like that.
And dude, that resonated with me. I heard that years ago, and it's resonated with me. And people ask me all the time, like, what do you regret? What are your regrets? If you could go back, like, what would you do differently? And I realized that, like, I am who I am right now, today. I'm the father that I am. I'm the leader that I am. I'm the business guy that I am. I am the net sum total of all of it, of the gun in my mouth, the drugs, the lying, the everything. And a lot of people in life, like, they try and shut off all the darkness. They shut off all the mistakes. All that shit that I fucked up is what's made me who I am. That's what's made my messages. That's what's made you. All of that shit is literally what's helped you and given you this, like,
it's the key
ability
to my success, dude.
Literally, you're sitting in front of hundreds of high schools and children over the last 5, 6, 7 years sharing your story. I mean, who knows how many fucking lives you've saved? Who knows how many people have been inspired? Like,
that's a crazy part.
You think all of that, as you look back at it now, you and I sitting here in my freaking house just having this conversation, like, I look back and I smile because I realize, like, all of that had to happen for me. And I think you'd probably say the same thing. All of that had to happen for you to be sitting here right now, being a UFC fighter, being a fucking rad dad, being a husband, being a literal voice in the community, saving lives. Like, it all had to happen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, you wouldn't be where you are. Like,
if I didn't go through those hardships. But here's the other thing, too. I have to continue to share my story. So, number one, that I don't forget it.
Yep.
And because I have, like, an easy forgetter, which is a blessing in some senses because I forget how shitty and hard training was. You don't let it
weigh on you.
And then the next day, I forget how shitty it was the day before, and so I just show up and train just as hard.
That's a good thing.
A good side of it.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I remember the pain and the anguish that I went through. I remember the pain that I put my family through. I remember the pain that I put Chelsea through. I remember those things by sharing this. And so that's the crazy thing. I had quit my job, and I moved, like about 60 miles away. I decided at 2 years sober, okay, I'm a little bit better off. I want to marry Chelsea. I proposed to her at my favorite fishing hole. And yeah, no shit, dude. I took her fishing and I tied on this fake ring and casted it out and then handed her the pole and was like, oh, hey, you should reel this in. And then I got down behind her and she was like, what the hell is this?
That's pretty cool.
And so I proposed to her, but I wanted to be a better person. See, I didn't want to marry her because we had a kid. I wanted to marry her because she loved me and because I loved her. I wanted to be an honest husband and a partner in this relationship. And I wasn't capable of doing that in those first couple of years.
Yeah.
And so I did that. We moved and I started working at this gym, just doing whatever I could do, hustling, man. I was teaching classes. I was working like 20 hours a week at the gym. I was doing plumbing side work. I was selling clothes. I was running a supplement shop. I was just doing I was doing whatever and then training full time and then trying to compete. And I gave myself 2 years to make it. And so from that year, almost 2 years later, I hit my breaking point. I had put recovery second and focused everything on that, and it was not working. I was focusing on the problem, and I was the problem, and I had to get out of the way of that. So I sat down and I worked an entire 12-step program with another drug addict and alcoholic in recovery. And I finished that 12-step program, and after doing that, like, my attitude and outlook on life had changed. And all of a sudden, I was able to be where I was at. I was able to be with my wife when I was with my wife. I was able to still put 80, 90, 100 hours a week in at the gym and various jobs. I had like 3 or 4 different sources of income just to barely make it in a ghetto apartment right behind the gym.
But dude, I remember that, man. That's when I met you, and I was
you were
training me, and I was sponsoring
Yeah.
Not in an AA sort of way.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
like, you remember that? And
Yeah. Oh yeah.
you trained me for my first 2 fights. Like that was that was what makes like our friendship and this whole story for me personally so fucking rad, because when I met you, you had that big ass brace on your leg, you'd blown out your knee, and it was just
that was my
crazy. And so to go from there to here, 10 years, 11 years later, like fighting in the UFC, winning the Ultimate Fighter, dude, I smile, like, cause it's it was so dark, and now it's like you're standing in front of.
I got asked to go try out. And
so talk about that, because some people listening have no idea about your story, and you don't have to like get into like we already talked about all that stuff, but you fight in the UFC.
So yeah, I ended up getting an opportunity. Somebody was like, "Hey man, I'll pay your way, and you don't owe me anything in return." And I took that
to go down to Vegas.
Okay. So I went down, I tried out, and this was different than the first time I tried out, because when I went into interview, we were like, "What makes you different?" Let me guess, this is your last shot. And it really was. I was at that 2-year mark. But here's the thing is I wasn't going to put that on anybody else. I was going to go back to work to support my family, and I was okay with that. I made that decision. And so I said, no, it's not my last shot. As a matter of fact, my life is really good.
Yeah. You're like, I'm alive, bro.
I said, the only thing
died.
that makes me different is September 9th, 2005, I overdosed on heroin accidentally, and I died. I was beat up. I went through treatment. But if I stay sober for another couple of months, I'll have 4 years of continuous sobriety. And I said, that's the only thing maybe. And they were like, yeah, hell yeah, we like you. Get your stuff. Get out of here.
Isn't it fascinating how the first time?
Yeah.
Like, and this is what I share with people all day long. Like, people share like the good stuff, the fluff. Like you were saying earlier, Instagram. It's like, here's my Instagram life, and everything's great.
Yeah.
Well, then when you say like, no, actually it wasn't, and I put a gun in my mouth and I wanted to kill myself, and I was a drug addict and whatever. People are like, holy shit. They resonate with that.
Yeah.
Truth. They resonate with truth.
Yep. And I wasn't trying to.
So you told him that.
I wasn't trying to do a poor me.
Yeah.
I wasn't any of that.
It was real.
It was just real. I said, that's the only thing that maybe makes me different.
Yeah.
And I told him, I love martial arts, and I've competed a lot, and, I love the sport of mixed martial arts. But outside of that, that's the only thing that makes me different. And I got a call a couple of days later that I'd made it on the show. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll call you back. And I hung up the phone, and I had this like spiritual advisor, this guy in my network of 3 or 4 guys that I really trusted. And I called him and I said, there's no way I can go on that show. There's like unlimited alcohol. It's wild. There's no way. And he was like, Court, let me ask you this. Do you think if you make it on there and do whatever you do on that fighting stuff, because he knows nothing about fighting, he was like, do you think you could better provide for your family? And I was like, dude, if I even make it on there, my stock goes up. Local shows, I'd be a main event. I'd probably make $3,000-$4,000 a fight. And he said, well, what if you win the show? And I was like, I don't even want to think about that.
Yeah, your ticket's punched.
It's like, I think you get a 6-figure. I don't even know. You become a UFC fighter and you're fighting the best guys in the world. And he's like, okay, outside of that, do you think if you go on there, do you think possibly you could help a drug addict and alcoholic who's struggling? And I was like, dude, millions of people will see it. And he's like, well, what about the people in the house? What if there's an alcoholic in there struggling? He's like, you never know, man. He said, maybe you ought to pray about it or think about it. And so I sat down, I said a little prayer. I was like, whatever higher power you are up there, like, I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do, but I'm good. I just need some direction, man. And so I took an Epsom salt bath because I was super sore, and I had this little vision of me holding up the trophy, and I tried to bat it out of my head. And then I went out and I was like, I got to call these guys. I got to go on the show. I called them. I ended up showing up. They took everything from me. I went on the show. My first fight was the hardest fight I've ever had because I didn't want to be there. I was scared. I was thinking about, man, I should be back on a plumbing job. It's so much easier. And Mike Tyson was in there. There was so much pressure, Dana White, Lorenzo Fertitta, the guys who owned the UFC. And they were like, if you don't win, you're not going to be anything. And if you win, your life will change and everything will be great. And there was so much pressure. And I was the last fight of the night because you had to fight to make it into the house.
Yeah.
And if you lost, you went home. If you won, you made it in the house. And so and we didn't know that before. We knew that the day before we got there. We had to cut weight the next day and then fight the next day. And so I'd cut weight in a bathroom in a shitty hotel, and there was guys coming in busted up, bloody. I had a friend that made it on the show from my same neighborhood that He'd knocked out like 4 guys in a row. He got knocked out in the first round. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? And then I was like, okay, you got to start warming up. So I started warming up, you know, and then I was like, well, which one of you guys are cornering me? This guy's cornering me? Okay. All right, put me in a guillotine. Do this, do that, do that. And then I started shadow boxing, moving around. I got my heart rate up, and I went out and I walked out and I look over and I see Mike Tyson, those guys, and I'm like, okay. And then I saw the size of the room and I was like, this is just like throwdown, this gym I'm training at. Yep. And I put my ass on the line every day in that gym, and I said, this is no different. It's the same size. It's quiet. Just go out and fight. And I went out and I put on the best fight I could in my life, and I almost lost. But I broke my sternum taking this guy down. I landed on his knee. This Polish tall guy, just tough as nails, had a 10 fight career, maybe longer in the UFC, long fight career in the UFC. And I barely edged out a decision, and I was like busted up, and they were like, hey man, how do you feel? And I was like, I feel great, you know, and I made it into the house.
I can't breathe. I feel like I'm going to die.
And then I used that prayer and the meditation while I was there, and I stayed quiet, and I focused, and I listened to the instructors, because I had this John Hackelman, I had Howard Davis Jr., Olympic gold medalist, Sammy Henshin, Olympic silver medalist in wrestling,
dude, your season was badass.
Just all these super awesome legends in the sport. And I took all this information. I would take notes every day, and I didn't get caught up in any controversy, any drama. I didn't argue with anybody. I didn't talk shit to anybody. I was like, man, this is the best thing ever. They were like, oh, this is like jail. And I'm like, this motherfucker never been to jail, dude. This is I can order whatever food I want. I train twice a day, and I can rest in between practices. I don't have to teach 12 fucking privates. I don't have to teach classes. I don't have to do plumbing side work in the middle of the night. I'm not slinging freaking clothes that are knockoff clothes. I'm not running a supplement shop. I'm not dealing with any of that. I'm just here to fight. And I just was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And it was stressful, but it was great. You know, yeah. I put my little mask on, put my earplugs in, and pass out, you know, and then that was it. When I go to sleep, and it's like, I didn't partake in the drinking, but nobody partaked in the drinking. And I was open with my recovery story. So nobody offered me alcohol. Nobody said anything. And I talked about, I could consider myself able to talk about recovery, and that was it. MMA and recovery and my experiences, and that's all. So that's all I talked about. That was it during my story, during my interviews, the hundreds of interviews that I did, all that stuff. And then 19 days later, I fought the #1 pick on the show. I lost a controversial decision. They argued, and then that season there was 28 guys cut down to 14. And so the idea was whoever lost that they thought deserved to go on took a spot.
I remember that.
Somebody else got picked for that spot, but he broke his hand, and then I took his spot. So I lost this controversial decision to this Canadian kid, Nick Ring, and he was like the top guy. He was an undefeated MMA fighter, undefeated boxer, like world-class kickboxer, and a high-level brown belt in jiu-jitsu, gi and no gi, like killer, really well-rounded, true martial artist, trained for years and years and years, and I lost a split decision to him. And that was my first loss since Jeremy Horn a number of years before. And I just was like, you know what? I did my best, and that was it. And Chuck was like pissed, man. He was screaming at Dana White. He's like, that's some bullshit, and screaming at the judges.
Because Chuck Liddell was your coach.
Yeah. And like, he didn't know me from Adam, but he thought I'd won. And a lot of people thought I had won. And so, I mean, like most people thought I had won. And so they ended up bringing me back. I fought 9 days later against this guy named James Hammertree, who was like 6'2", big. He was from Florida, and he was like he had a bunch of like first round knockouts, heavy right hand, and I ended up standing guillotine him in like the second or third round. So I finished him. 5 days later, I fought to get into the finale against Brad Tavares, who's still a freaking legend. He's the freaking flying Hawaiian, knocking people out. He's awesome. He's out of Las Vegas via Hawaii. He's like the coolest dude, gnarly, powerful, explosive. He's had a super long career in the UFC. He's probably still in the top 10. Like, I fought him, and right at the end of the third round, I caught him with a left hook, rocked him, I double-legged him, took his back, and choked him unconscious. He didn't even freaking tap, dude. Like,
yeah, I remember
hardcore,
that, dude.
He went out, boom, on his knees, and that was it. And I stood up, and I went, holy shit.
You're like, that's it, bro.
So I got 2 finishes, and that night was my dad's birthday. It was like his 54th or 53rd birthday. It was February 24th. And we had no phone, no cell service, no nothing. Like, they took everything from us. And one of the coaches told Chuck, like, oh, it's his dad's birthday. You know, you should sneak him your phone. And, like, he's like, nah, man, I don't want to sneak the phone and blah, 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 you know, that you can get kicked out for stuff like that. And, like, the kid Antonio was like, dude, you're fucking Chuck Liddell, dude. You can do what the hell you want. And he's like, yeah, you're right, man. And he comes over and he's like, Court, hey, here's my phone, dude. Go sneak into the bathroom if you want to call your dad. And I was like, dude, really? And so I snuck into the bathroom, and I didn't even know my dad's cell phone number. So I called my wife because I couldn't remember it. So I called my wife, and I was like, hey, babe. And she hadn't heard from me. She knew nothing about, because nobody knew. And I was like, is Dad there? And I said, I love you. I'm fine, and I'm doing good. And then my dad got on the phone. I said, Dad, I called. I want to tell you happy birthday, and I love you. And I said, by the way, I just finished a guy, and I'm in the finale. Don't tell anybody. Bye. Boom. And I hung up, you know. And then after that, I walked out, and I was like, holy shit. And then, you know, a couple days later, like, we got out, and I remember, like, I was smiling from ear to ear, and I was like proud, and I like, holy cow. And I got back home, and the gym had kind of separated, and there was no coach there. So I was like 2 or 3 weeks into this recovery. I got paid half of the money. I made like $5,000 per finish, and they paid me half of it. So I had like $7,500 plus the $3,000 I had when I was in the house. And so I had about $10,000, and I was like, okay, I can use this until it's time for me to fight 2 months later in the finale, or 3 months later in the finale. But I didn't have a coach. I had some training partners, but some guys were in and out of college stuff, and it wasn't really solid. And so I called Chuck, and I was like, dude, I don't have a coach. What do I do? And he's like, hold on, I'll call you back. He booked me a flight, flew me out there. He told John, Court's with us now. And John's like, okay. And so I started training side by side with Chuck and the powerhouse John Hackelman. And so everything changed. I took notes. I did everything. I trained super hard. I lived at his house for like 6 weeks.
I remember that, man. I remember when you went out there and it was like, where's Court going? You know, when you came back from the show, and it was like, what happened? What's going on? And you couldn't like,
there was like
say anything to anybody.
Non-disclosure where you couldn't tell
You're
anybody
like, I can't say anything.
Yep.
And this is like when you were training me and then left to go do that, because I was still I was fighting. And you came back, and I remember you didn't tell anybody, but it was like,
no, I couldn't.
You couldn't say anything, but then you went out, and it was like, holy shit, dude! Like you know, you hit it off with Chuck and John, which, dude, I mean, legends, bro, absolute legends.
It was cool. I had great training. I remember Luke Rock, all the AKA guys came out there. I got to train with those guys. Like, we had killer coaches. The practices were super hard. A lot of it was focused on Chuck. But then John Hackelman had this ability to completely train me 100% while he was training Chuck at the same time against Scott. And I mean, we just got ready. He brought all these different people in to beat me up and throw me around. And we just went after this guy. And so I was just, you know, just training and sleeping and training and sleeping. And then I came home, and I was just like, okay, well, this is it. I came home for my son's 3rd birthday, Isaac. Had his birthday. Then I flew right back out there, finished the camp out, came home, finished my last week. Chuck fought and lost. He broke Rich Franklin's arm, and then he got caught with a bunch coming in, and like I was just like furious. I'm like, ooh, redemption, or you know, I'm like, I had Howard Davis Jr. with me. I just worked. I went out. So finale night comes, and I just I love Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Ohio. It's just one of my favorite songs. No particular reason other than I like the tune, and it's just I like oldies rock and roll, so I listen to oldies rock and roll a lot, and so. I was like, that's my fight song or whatever, and somebody was like, oh, I don't know about that, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't care what you think.
Like, that's my jam,
dude.
That's
my jam, dude. Whatever. And dude, I had an Olympic gold medalist boxing coach. I had an Olympic silver medalist. I had Chuck in my corner. I had Jason in my corner. Like John Hackelman. I had like the best corners.
You had the biggest party, the biggest fan party was at my house. So you had all those badasses there. Yeah. And I had like a massive party at my house. I'll never forget that night, dude. I'll never forget that.
It was insane, man. Yeah. And fight time came. I did my warm up. I walked out, and I was just ready to go. And it was in this small coliseum. You know, it's like 2,200, 2,500 people in the Palms Casino. Yep. My mom and dad were front row. My Chelsea's mom and dad were in front row. Like, family was there, and I didn't see any of them. I didn't do any. I just focused on going out and and just fighting. And I went out, and the like first round ended, and I was in pretty good position. Like it was pretty close, but I think I had a little bit more control. Second round came, caught him with a hook or a straight right, double leg him, took him down, took his back, got him in a rear naked in a quick choke, finished him, hopped off, did like a little cartwheel flip, and went, holy shit, that just happened. And then they were doing the post fight announcement, and they were talking to me, and they said, what do you want to say? Is there anything you want to say? And I said, I love my wife. I love my son, Isaac. I love Chuck. But I want to dedicate this fight to all those who are struggling. And then that was it. Like that's when that's when the mission really happened. Like
you got really emotional.
Super emotional.
Really
man.
Emotional. I don't think there was a single person who knows you or has been in your life or whether it was family, friends. I mean, I was literally screaming, like throwing fucking buffalo wings around my basement, like going insane. And then everybody's bawling their eyes out watching you hold that glass trophy up. Like, what was that moment really like? Like, I mean, you've answered 1,000 questions on this, but like you going from dying to the
5
most
years later,
horrific deal to now visualizing. And you said you saw that in the house and saying, this is what I want to do. This is my passion. And now you're literally sharing your message with the world. What was that like holding that glass trophy up there?
It's like I wasn't even saying it. It just was meant to be said, and then it just came out. And then, it was like...
You can script whatever you want there, right?
I wanted to dedicate that fight to all those who are struggling because I had made it out.
Solve it.
I had made it out. And, it's like if I can make it out, anybody can make it out. And so after that happened, like I went out. I make sure not to drink or party or anything. I made like $47,000 or $48,500 that night. I got a $25,000 submission of the night bonus, and I made 8 and 8, 8,000 to show, 8,000 to win, and then they owed me like $7,500, so like whatever that is, maybe $46,500. So that was the most money I'd ever made in one night for sure. And I had those checks. I remember I got back to my room and a friend called me who was new in recovery. And he just was like, Court, remember you're in a casino. You get a lot of money and you're a drug addict and alcoholic.
Yeah.
Whatever you do.
Now you're a celebrity.
Don't pick up, don't drink or use, no matter what. And I was like, okay. And like Chuck knew that. And I was worried about that because I had known Chuck as being a partier. But dude, that guy didn't drink. He was like, he supported so many people and was like such a good, like he's like taking care of all these people and taking care of his family and like just the most solid dude ever. And like he wasn't a partier. He was just, like go, go, go. And I mean, like, so it was totally different than what I thought. And I had all these wonderful people around me. And so I went out and like, man, I got this crazy congratulation. There was like 3,000 people on the floor just screaming, and like, I took pictures, and like that's when life changed, and I came home and I started going back to those meetings. I rested up a little bit and then signed for my next fight a couple months later. And the crazy thing is, like, I had my first big fight, and on the way to the venue, I got a call from a friend of mine who got wrongfully accused and was in jail. So he was in a relationship with a lady who had a mental illness, and she had split personalities, and so her split personality had this crazy stuff that happened. Eventually, he got found not guilty on it, but he spent a year in jail on some stuff that didn't actually happen. Like, she had conjured it up in her head, and they had no proof, and they ended up arresting him. He lost his job, all this crazy stuff. But he's like he's since passed away, but he's like one of the. I mean, he held no. He's like, oh, she's just sick, and I'm just trying to take care of her, or whatever. And like, she was, oh my God, what happened? Why are you in prison or jail? And like, she didn't know. She was truthfully sick, and she has the help that she needed now, and that all worked its way out. But that dude called me on the way to the venue when I was getting ready to fight my very first big fight at UFC 121 in Anaheim, California, at the Honda Center. And on the way, I was in the van, and I was like, oh, shit, Davis County Jail. And I picked up the phone call, and somebody behind me was like, dude, only you would take a call from Davis County Jail. And I was like, man, it's my friend. He's like, what in the fuck? And I was like, hey, man, how you doing? Is everything okay? Yeah, okay. And we just talked for a few minutes, got to the venue, and went out, fought. And, I ended up getting a 3rd-round submission, finished the guy, but I shattered my right hand.
Yeah.
And so I went through my first surgery in my UFC career right after that, and I made it through it sober. I didn't use any of the pain medication. They gave me pain medication when they did the surgery, but it was under their care, and then I just didn't leave with any pain medication. And I made it through that, and a lot happened in between that, but I stayed focused on my recovery first. And I worked on the relationship with my wife and my son. Not to mention, right before I left for the Ultimate Fighter, we wanted to have 2 kids, right? And so right the day before we left for the Ultimate Fighter, me and Chelsea tried to have a kid. And so when I came back telling her I was in the finale, she came back and said I'm pregnant. And so we had another kid on the way. And a week before I fought that guy, we had Crew, my second son, a week before I fought that first fight at UFC 121. And so that was really cool. And then right after that, I purchased my first home. I'd paid off all my lawyer fines, my court fees, my restitution, paid back my family, paid everybody I owed money to, and had just enough to put a down payment, the bare minimum, and pay off and buy a car for my wife. And then I drove the car that I got her in high school. And that was it. And I was just solid. I just went back to practice. I went to recovery meetings. I stayed focused on that, and then stayed focused on my recovery, and just one thing led to another. And ESPN did the Sports Center piece, Deadman Fighting.
Yeah.
And
which, guys, if you haven't seen that, we'll put the link in to the podcast here. But it's incredible. I remember it being framed at the gym, and that was right in the entryway as you came into the gym. Is something really motivating and iconic to look at. It was really cool.
It's really cool. It's short. It's only about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's kind of my intro when I speak too. So, but you can check. You can go to courtmcgee.com, and there's a link on there. Outside of that, I think it's on YouTube. Just look up Deadman Fighting, the ESPN
we'll put
story.
the link.
So
we're technologically savvy on this thing, Court.
Yeah,
we can put links in things. It's crazy.
Unsavvy. So I got this call, and I had about 6 years of sobriety. So this is 6, maybe 7 years ago. I think maybe I had 5.5 years of sobriety. And I got this call, and it was like, hey, this is Detective so-and-so. I need you to call me back. And I froze. I was like, oh, shit. I hadn't been in any trouble for years. I didn't know what had anything to do. I was just, scared to death. I'm like, what the heck? What is this? And so I asked my wife, Chelsea, I was like, what do you think I should do? And she's like, dumbass, why don't you just call him back? And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So I called him back, and he's like, hey, oh, yeah, man, this is great, man. He said, thanks for calling me back. Hey, man, we love your story. By the way, so there was an officer that night, and he did part of the ESPN piece, but they couldn't put him in because he was undercover and blah, 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 and so the guy that was responsible for being alive today, he's going to be up at the Capitol building. I'm putting on this conference, and I would love for you to come share your story. So I was like, sure, service work, yep. I always just, hey, do you need help? Yep, I'm here, whatever it may be. So I just committed to it, and then I started to freak out, man. It was the Capitol buildings, a bunch of judges, and I think at the time, there was district attorneys there. I think the attorney general at the time was there. I mean, it was crazy. I know the governor had stopped in, or at some point, had walked through the door but left or whatever. It was pretty crazy. And so I got up and I shared, and I was really open and honest, and I thanked that guy. And then after that, they were like, hey, would you come speak at the Utah Annual Narcotics Association meeting, which is every narcotics officer in the state of Utah. It's on this date, September 9th. And I'm like, wow, yeah, dude. I said, that's my overdose date. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. I'll be there no matter what. And so I showed up. I delivered a speech there. It was super raw. I told it, it was a bunch of narcotics officers. I thanked them because if it wasn't for their good detective work, I'd have been dead. Yeah. And I thanked them for charging me too, because it made me do the UAs and do this and that. And maybe that's what I needed. That's what I needed at the time. And so whatever, I thanked him. I told my story. I gave him some highlights, plus some of the fighting highlights. And then I got done, and this sheriff that worked for a sheriff's department in a rural community, was like, hey, I would love for you to come speak at our high school. We're starting to have some problems with the kids, and I think they get inspiration from that. And I was like, whoa, that's a big deal. Like, okay, yeah, I can do that. So six and a half years ago, I went out to Emory High School, and I spoke for the first time. And right before I went up, like, I guess, like the principal of schools or the guy over schools for the entire county was just like, there's no way I'm putting a drug addict UFC fighter up there talking to my kids. And the principal was like, I'm totally against it. And like, I guess he kind of pushed for it. Like, no, you got to have him come do it. And so right before I went up on stage, like, he booked me for 2 high schools and 2 junior highs. And I was like nervous and, oh man, I don't really know what I'm going to tell these kids, but I've got enough to work with. And so I decided kind of where I was going to keep the F word out of it, you know, and like I had shared my story enough times in like recovery meetings, and I had worked on it a little bit, and I was like, okay, so right before I go up, he's like, dude, don't screw this up. I might lose my job. And I'm like, oh shit, this guy's job's on the line and he's risking it to have me come do it. So I was like, I better put everything into it. So I got done with it, man, and like standing ovation. There was a couple kids in tears. After I got done, like that principal took his kids out of the school and took them to the next one. And I had tons of kids come up to me. I had kids that were like in front of everybody saying, dude, I've been using for like 2 years. I'm worried. I've tried to stop, but I can't. I had people that were like, hey, you know, I just smoke weed on the weekends. I do this. And it was all stuff that I knew about. And I was like, oh man, like this could lead to this could. And so I was overwhelmed. And I had one kid in particular that was like, he had skipped school and had been skipping school, but he came to school on that day. And he was like, dude, I came here just to listen to you. You know, I'm a huge fan of yours. You know, he was like, I watched your whole career, man. I love your story. And he said, I'm struggling, man. What do I do? And I said, I gave him my number. And I said, reach out to me after. I said, I got a fight in a week. I was fighting Robert Whitaker, the current UFC middleweight champion. And I was like, I just reach out to me. So he, you know, like I gave him my number, and I went out, I fought, I beat Robert Whitaker, and then I came home and I took that kid's calls for a number of months, and then I didn't hear anything from him. And then like 5.5 years later, I went to a funeral of a kid who overdosed that was just like him. And on the way home, we stopped at this like bar and grill to grab some food. And I went with a friend who was my very first student, who's a cop. And we sat down, and I had this kid walk over, and he's like, hey, Court, it's so-and-so. And I was like, oh, hey, man. And I didn't think about it. And he's like, yeah, man, you gave me your number. I used to call you all the time. You spoke at my high school, Emory High School, like shit, probably 6 or 7 years ago. He said, man, I'm sober today. And he said, I got hired on at Hill Air Force Base. And I was like, holy shit. Wow, you know, and it's like from that point on, I never turned down an engagement. I spoke at tons of high schools. I spoke for the entire Juvenile Justice Assembly in the state of Utah. I went to youth treatment, drug treatment, youth corrections. I went to state, like 4 different state prisons for different programs, some recovery programs, some educational programs. Like I've spoke at Capitol buildings. I've spoke in front of lawyers. I've spoke in front of like sales executives at big corporations on personal development and team building. And like my story resonates with those guys, overcoming adversity, of course, but also too, like having a goal, sticking to the game plan, and then following through with that. And then if it doesn't work, like having like, okay, I got to go this way, you know, but surrounding myself with good people first and foremost by becoming a good person. Yeah. Like people that say, oh, just surround yourself with good people. Like that doesn't work. Okay.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh yeah, you can just do that. And I'm like, okay, so let's see. You got like 4 or 5 felony charges, 10 years in a state penitentiary, and you come out, who are you going to surround yourself with? Have you been in that position? Nah, fuck you. You don't know what you're talking about. But all of a sudden, if you start working a program of recovery and you surround yourself with good people by becoming a good person, like that's how that happens, you know? And it's like you start living life. And I've seen that happen over and over and over and over. But, you know, it's like so technically I started that project the night that I dedicated my fight to all those who are struggling. That's why I took that gig at that high school, because I know that half of those students are going to be faced with drinking and smoking and taking pills. And I mean, I think just here in Utah alone, I don't know what the statistic is, but I know just in heroin alone, we lose 24 kids a month. And I'm talking like 18 to 24. So you can say they're an adult, but that's right out of high school. And that's even if they made it out of high school. And not to mention, I married my high school sweetheart. I lost my 2 best friends I went to school with. The one kid that charged me for burglary charges, he died on my 6-year sobriety birthday. I still wear his boots when I speak at high schools because he's a good kid. He's just not good on drugs and alcohol. And then my other friend, Cody, he went to prison for a couple of years. He got out. He stayed sober. He had tons of back pain because he broke his back, bulging disc stuff, and he went back on the prescription pain pills and accidentally overdosed, and he died a couple of months ago. I attended his funeral. So my 2 best friends in high school both accidentally died of drug overdoses, not intending on it. They were wonderful kids. I can tell you tons of great stories about them. They were wonderful people, just not wonderful on drugs and alcohol. They couldn't control and limit the amount they drank and used. And they lost their lives because of it. My high school wrestling coach married my wife and I. Like, so my story is perfect for high schools. And you want to talk about the athletic side? You think I can motivate some people? Try becoming a professional athlete in mixed martial arts. Go ask any UFC fighter, hey, what kind of shit have you been through to make it where you're at? I know the average career length in the UFC is 1.9 years and 3 fights. So if you make it past that, you're either tougher, meaner, or you've figured out a solution to kicking ass. You know, and you've got something that a lot of people don't. I know there's a lot now. There's about 500 people, but statistically, you take 500 people in the entire world fighting in the #1 organization in the world. And I know there's gnarly dudes outside of that too. But I'm talking about just the UFC. Like, it's tough, man. You got to grind when nobody's looking. You got to grind when people are looking. You got to go through injuries. I mean, I've fought with torn this and broke that. And
dude, it's the same.
Like,
it's the same as it's the same as getting sober, man.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same
as
thing.
getting sober. It's the same as being a good husband. It's the same as being a good dad. It's the same as anything. Yep. It's doing the tough work, doing the tough shit. You know, that's the thing about your story, bro, that I just, you know, not only being a friend and you know, knowing you for as long as I have, like kind of watching your entire story, but like you're that guy. You're the guy that you give your number to somebody and they call in the middle of the night, you know, and I think,
dude, I've been 2 weeks out of a fight and spent 10 hours in the ER with an overdose heroin addict and spent years with that person and then attended his funeral. Yeah, man. Like, I've done that. I do that. I've got a couple of doctors that are ER docs. Like, they got my number, man. I said, if you get a heroin addict that overdoses and is a young kid and you think I could possibly help and they're willing to, give me a call. And I get those calls, man, and I go on those fucking calls, even if I miss out and sleep, because I know that guarantees my sobriety for that day. You know, I offer my hand because now I have something to offer. When I started speaking, like, somebody was like, well, how much do you charge? You know, and I'm like, wait, how much do I what? And like, it was the narcotics officers. And it was for a big convention. There's going to be a couple thousand of us here. You know, if you charge us $20,000, we'll pay you, but I'll lose my job. And I charged them like, it was like $418 or something. Exactly what it cost me to get to Nevada, speak, and get back home. And outside of that, like, you know, it started working, but I wanted to get in front of schools because of the interaction that I've had with kids after speaking, as well as like school counselors. And then that's why I started the Mgee Project, the nonprofit, because it's easier for people to pay a nonprofit. Not to mention, I could use like more than half of the funds to get to places where people can't afford it. Yeah. So you go to a youth detention facility, they don't have an extra budget. They don't have an extra budget to get me in there. They can't pay, you know, $1,500, which is about like the average rate that I think a high school can pay. And sometimes, like, and I'm working my way into that, but I've delivered powerful messages at hundreds of high schools. And I like to hit rural communities because, you know, that's where there's a little bit more freedom. These kids are out on the farm and they got beer out there and they're, you know, and like,
it's more you, man. You know? It's you. Like, that's the thing. That's your deal. That's how you were raised. That's like, that's your rodeo. That's what I love about, you know, what I've shared with my story and with Lions Not Sheep is it's not some embellished Hollywood-esque type of movie to try and convince you that this way is the right way or this way is a fun way. It's like, look, I went down into a really dark place and I put a gun in my mouth. Like, I did heroin, I did drugs, and I turned that into where I am now. Is it the best? I don't know. Is it the worst? I don't know. All I know is that it's me.
Yeah.
And you know, I
that's what I know.
And that's what I know. That's what I share with people. And I tell people, like, with whether it's, you know, any of my Lions Not Sheep programs, the Lions Den. I mean, you heard me talk right before we got on the podcast here to those guys. Like, I don't share shit. Like, I don't hypothecate about this or that, or maybe try that. And it's like, no, here's what I did.
Yeah.
This is what I experienced. And I think that's what makes not only you, but your message powerful, man, is you did it. You died. You fucking went down into the depths of hell. You know, and people can say, oh, well, you were a junkie or you did this, you did drugs. It's like, look, motherfucker, everybody has their darkness. Like we were talking about earlier, everybody, I don't care where you go, who you talk to, everybody's got a story.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it was being abused as a kid, raped as a kid, whether it was drugs, whether it was this, everybody's got a fucking story. And what is really, really, really not only impressive, but it really moving to me is you're sharing the truth, your truth. And some people judge it. Some people say I don't want a druggie on my stage in front of my kids. You want to know who I want talking to my kids? You.
Yeah.
You want to know why I bring my kids and why you've seen my kids grow up since they were little? Is because you're the type of motherfucker I want around my kids because it's real shit.
Yeah.
And I hope to be that guy too. I hope to take my lessons and my stories and my experiences of being a dad and being this and being a husband and a father and being, you know, rich and poor and suicidal and excited and in some way, shape, or form, maybe someone just takes a nugget from something, you know, and runs with it. And then perhaps they take that and like how many kids have taken your message and shared it with somebody else and then shared it with somebody else. And I think
how many went to treatment and got sober? You know, like that's why I started it, because I didn't realize that I would have that big of an effect. It was law enforcement, and he said, hey, we got kids that are using drugs and drinking, and they think it's a big joke. And they don't listen to me because I'm a cop.
Right. But
and
they'll
I was
listen
like,
to you.
Okay. And he said, dude, maybe they'll listen to you. So I get up and I'm honest with them, you know, and I tell them that marijuana story, but I tell them like people told me there was negative consequences, but they never told me what the negative consequences were, other than, oh, you'll get arrested if you do drugs.
It's
don't
bad.
do it, or
God'll
just
be
say
mad.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't that. It was like, hey, man, maybe you have the disease of addiction and maybe it will affect you differently. And then I can share my personal experience of how I had to become a different person, how it didn't work out, how I still didn't feel like I fit in, and I couldn't stop or limit the amount. And then I lost all those friends, and then I ended up losing everything of any value in my life. And for me, recovery gave me, I used to say, recovery has given me everything of any value in my life.
Yeah.
But not necessarily, because I had great parents. But
they're all part of that. They're part of that picture now.
They're a part of that. So technically that's not true, but recovery has given me the ability to look at the things that I do have in life and value them. So I'm not trying to, I don't have to pretend to be somebody I'm not. I used to say stuff like that all the time. Like, oh, you know, and you think about those things like the ego inside of you. Hey man, you know, I'm ranked in the top 20 in the world. You know, I should be driving a Ferrari, you know, or whatever. Like, that's the most asinine statement ever. Like, what the hell does a Ferrari have to do with you competing at a high level? It doesn't. Are you here to compete at a high level because you want to compete at a high level, or are you here to compete at a high level to drive a Ferrari? Because neither of those work. Like it, and they don't, it doesn't even matter. You know, what matters for me today is that I can support my family. What matters to me is I'm spiritually fit. Dude, God has saw fit, or my higher power has saw fit that I haven't went without. I have not went without. And it's been tough, dude. I mean, it has been really tough, you know, but I've chosen this path, and this is the path I'm on, and I'm going to make the best of it. And no matter what, you know, and when it's time to hang it up, or when it's time to change route, like, I'll take the inspiration from the group around me. And, you know, I'm surrounded by good people because I'm willing to donate time to carry the message, which is crazy because I carry this message to people who struggle. And when they ask for help, I have some solutions for them just through my own experience. But I have people around me now, like the board members of my of the nonprofit, the Mgee Project. Like one of them, I've thought about incorporating school counselors and figuring out a way to where there's an open line of communication where if kids really are struggling, I don't want them to be condemned. See, because when you're a drug addict, you're condemned.
Dude. Yeah.
And if you don't think about that, okay, next time you drive past like a homeless guy, I want you to think kind and loving thoughts of that guy, because you usually turn your head away from him so you don't have to give him $1 or whatever, and you think, oh man, why would he want to be that way? Chances are you don't think too much about it. You drive past that and say, thank God that's not me, right? Mm-hmm. Well, did it ever like occur to you that guy's got a name? Did it ever occur to you like, so I have an experience with this, man. I bought that man a chicken sandwich and a big glass of water because I thought if I was in his shoes, that's what I would want. And then come to find out, he'd been to my Jeremy Horn fight, and he was out holding the sign, right? And he was holding the sign to pay for shoes for his 2 sons that he still had custody for. And he had a pretty nasty heroin problem. And the heroin was to take care of the pain from Fabry's disease that he had, which Fabry's disease costs about $250,000 a year for these monthly like injections you get to stop the pain in your extremities. This gnarly disease. It's a nerve disease. It's bad. So that dude was taking his heroin because he couldn't afford, and he couldn't go to work because he would lose Medicaid. Well, I gave that guy a chicken sandwich, and like 6 months later, I saw him in one of these recovery groups, man, and I didn't even recognize him. And he was like, hey, man, you bought me a chicken sandwich? And I'm like, holy shit, dude. Hey, man, nice to see you, bro.
Yeah.
And then he got a job working part-time, and he's such a good employee at this job that they moved him to a managerial spot, right? Now he's in this managerial spot and he's doing really good work, but they aren't putting him past full time so he can still get his $250,000 worth of injections so he can live long enough to see his goddamn kids graduate. But I'll tell you what, if anybody would have told me, oh, by the way, hey, that homeless guy over there that's like beet red, standing out there, probably smells terrible and just has shitty ass clothes on and, begging for money. That guy is going to provide you and your 2 children the first real Christmas experience of your life. Like I would have been like, what the fuck are you talking about? How many shrooms have you been on, bro? And he did. He moved into a house. He paid rent. And then he didn't have enough money for Christmas, and he had his family move back in with him. So I was able to give him a Christmas tree and a couple of presents. And I went over there, dude, and I was just like sobbing in tears because my kids were like, oh, this is so cool. We're giving them Christmas. Like, I get to really show my kids the miracle of Christmas, the experience of Christmas giving. And that came from a homeless guy, and like, I didn't plan that shit out. It just happened that way, and I was in a good spot spiritually. And I thought, man, that dude looks tired. He looks hot as shit and hungry. Come to find out, he's a really good dad, and he's an even better employee. And he's a wonderful, he's a productive member of society. And you know what? He's not going to live much longer. But guess what? The life that he's lived, man, he's been through that. He's been able to help other people. And he's got multiple years of sobriety now. And now you go, oh man, that's so-and-so, man. He comes over and helps me out with this and does that. And he can barely walk, but he just, it's like, it's that guy. Drug addicts and alcoholics, man, and drug dealers. I mean, you get a prescription for Adderall and you sell one of your Adderall to your friend for $2, you're a drug dealer. So, and there's no difference between you and what you think a drug dealer is. That's dealing drugs, but like that needs to be said.
It's true.
And I can say it. Nobody's going to fire me. I can say it because it happened to me. And I got charged for stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I've been through that. And I've paid all those fines and lawyer fees back. I've made amends, financial and spiritual amends. And I live a good life today. And it's like I live in a life of abundance, and it's good. And I don't know what's next. I know October 27th I signed a fight in Canada. It's like a Fox Sports 1 card. And I'm fighting a super tough Dominican guy, and that's the next thing on the radar. But dude, that's October 27th. I don't know what's going to come, but I did my 5 miles this morning. I got practice scheduled for tomorrow, but I'm going to live in today.
Dude, when you right before we get on here, bro, like I seriously love you, man. Like right before we get on, we're talking and you're like, I'm in this moment.
Yeah.
That's been my biggest probably discovery, my biggest realization, the biggest thing that's brought me into reality versus like this false narrative of anger or pain or frustration is like, it's not morbid because there's a lot of dudes that are 39 years old that just didn't wake up today. Yeah. Not because they killed themselves, not because they OD'd. Like the Almighty was like, "You're out, motherfucker." Mm-hmm. And I won the lottery today. I woke up.
Yep.
And what you were saying earlier is something that I like fervently, passionately, more than anything else, believe. It's like right here, right now. Like I could be thinking about business and things and and it's like being present at that stoplight and you see that guy and you give him a buck or you give him a chicken sandwich. Mm-hmm. That lady, the court lady who's like, I could throw this motherfucker in the clink.
Yeah.
Or I can give him the chicken sandwich.
Yep.
You know, the people that were around me, that the cops at my school, when I used to come to school fucking wasted, who would put their arm around me and say, dude, stop fucking around.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Who I am dear friends with to this day. You know, you never know, dude. It's like such a freaking crazy analogy. Like I'm going to start using that, like the chicken sandwich, man.
Yeah,
you never know who's going to take that chicken sandwich and turn it into a fucking feast. Mm-hmm. And all throughout my days, I think back to like,
some people need second chances, man.
I think about how many people gave me a chicken sandwich, man.
Yeah.
I think about how many people like really stood by me, you know, when it was like dark shit, like dark shit. And like, you think about today and now and houses and cars and things, and it's like, who can I give a chicken sandwich to today? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, how can I help raise kids that will look at somebody that same way?
Yeah.
Because I was a fucking piece of shit. I was the guy standing on the corner. I never had to beg. I never had to go out, but I was a fucking dirt bag.
And dying
inside. I was drowning. I was dead. And people still gave me a chicken sandwich, and I look at it today, and that's why I like being present in this moment. It's all I've got. Mm-hmm. I don't have tomorrow. Yesterday's
you don't
dead.
know, man.
I don't know. I mean,
you never know.
You know, I tell people this all the time. I could give you, and it's not about money. It's not about anything. I could give you $1 billion right now. I could drop $1 billion cash right in front of you. You can't change yesterday, and guess what? I know you think you can, but you can't do shit about tomorrow or next week.
No.
And so it's like right here, right now. This practice, this dinner, you know, this playing catch with my kids, this football practice, this fishing, you know what I mean? It's like, that's all we've got, man. And I think what's really, really, really beautiful, not only about your story, but you know, what I appreciate about our friendship is the title of my next book is Your Mess is Your Message. And I've felt this way for a long time. And I bought it just, you know, something comes in your brain, you can't fucking get it out of your brain, because really what has helped me help so many people, and if you will, hand out so many chicken sandwiches, is acknowledging my mess and really making my mess, if you will, which is the truth, which is the darkness, which is the suicide, my message. And here you are literally traveling the country and the world, beating the shit out of people, and then standing in front of hundreds or thousands of kids, giving them...
Or prison inmates.
Potential. Yeah, I mean, standing in front of human beings, sharing your deepest, darkest, most fucked up, gnarly, junky, you're the outcast of society, and now here you are literally changing the fucking world with that mess.
Yeah.
Dude, it's like ass backwards from everything we ever thought, like what success would be, right?
Years it would be this. Yeah. Yeah.
It's fucking amazing, dude. And I think the message from this, you know, like what a friggin' insane conversation. The message from this for me is that, man, it's like you and I sitting here, two regular freaking jackwagons who have had the good fortune of having enough chicken sandwiches that we stayed fed.
Oh yeah.
And now here we are sharing what most people judge as like really crazy, chaotic darkness. And that's actually what's helping people. Mm-hmm. That's what's motivating people. That's what's inspiring people. You, man. Dude, it's the more I've shared my story, the more I've shared my darkness, like the real dark shit. I mean, my inbox is full. I can't tell you how many times I meet people out on the street that are like, dude, you have no idea how much that one post or that one video meant. And I don't know. I'll never know. You'll never know until you see the kid and, oh, you 5 years ago you gave me your phone number, but literally the ripples of your story, bro, it's changing the world. And like, I'm really grateful to be able to be friends with you. We're friends, right? Are we friends?
Hell yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I will kick your ass if we're not. I'll at least be a good sparring partner for you.
Hey, can I do a plug?
Dude, we're almost to the plug part of the podcast, but yeah, you can go ahead and plug whatever you want to plug right now.
All right. So, yeah, if there's anybody's listening who, like knows somebody who struggles, has a family member, friend, son, daughter, mom, dad. So when I started the foundation, the Mgee Project, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, I started it the night I dedicated my fight to all those who are struggling. And I didn't know that what would come from that night. I had no idea that 8 years later I'd still be competing in the UFC. I was living in the moment. But now I see I have those opportunities, and I do have those opportunities arise, but there's a lot of places that can't afford anything. And it's like give the next place an opportunity by donating to the Mgee Project. It's mgeeproject.org. You can donate right on
We'll
there.
put all the links in, bro. We'll have all your social media creds and all the links in here for sure.
Go donate and help me get to the next place. Help me and my team get to the next place. And I didn't think it would turn out the way it is, but here's the thing. Like, I can't help every single kid that comes forward, but I can build a team of people where we can capture more. And let me tell you, man, when those kids call you 6 years later, just after they got married or after they had their kid or after they get their first, length of sobriety, like it's a rewarding feeling knowing that they made it to a deep, dark spot where they didn't think they could get out. And then they thought of the bearded guy with the cauliflower ear and then made that call. And I want to make that more available because there are tons of resources. I mean, tons of resources for people to achieve sobriety. You can't sit in silence. If you are struggling, ask for help. And it's just like, if you get a shot, go to the Mgee Project, mgeeproject.org. Yeah, make a contribution.
Yeah. I think what's really cool too is just sharing the story, share the podcast, share this, getting the message out. Yeah. The thing that I've realized about social media conversations like this is I don't really know who's going to be affected.
No.
I don't really know because I know that there are people who told
Woody
me
said
things.
It's none of our business.
Well, yeah, Woody said it. But I can tell you, and I know you know this too, there are people that have come into my life who said things to me 12, 18, 20 years ago that resonate with me now. Like I would have told them to fuck off 20 years ago and they told me that.
Yeah.
And, my mom, every single day I left the house, she always used to tell me, remember who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever, mom. Fuck off.
Yeah.
Whatever, I tried to run out. She'd grab me and kiss me, and you're like, get away from me, old lady. You're crazy, right? And I think about that now, and I look in my mirror every single day. I'm like, remember who the fuck you are, bro.
Yeah.
And that's like,
and then when your kids run out the house, you say, hey,
I'm inspired.
Hey, remember who you are.
I say it to my kids now, and they're like, whatever, Dad. And I'm like, shit, I did that,
Yeah.
But dude, I seriously, bro, I love you. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, man.
Love on you too, and talking, man. Seriously, like, guys. Please go follow Court. We're going to put all the links here in the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, please share. Addiction, not just with drugs, and heroin, but like there's so many people that are struggling, and I think this message could really benefit them. If you're struggling with depression, if you're struggling with anxiety, with suicidal remorse, thoughts, with suicide, it doesn't have to be heroin or cocaine or whatever else. It's just fucking tell the truth, man. Like really just tell your story. And if, I know it sounds cheesy and cliche, and I was told this my whole life, dude, if I can do it, you can do it. But like if two friggin' jackwagons like me and you can do it, I'm pretty certain like most anybody can. Because I'm not the smartest motherfucker on the planet, but I've learned a few things and you've learned a few things, and this shit's real, man. So, all right, my friends, thank you very much for tuning in, Court.
Yep.
You're a scholar and a gentleman. When's your fight?
October 27th.
So if you're watching this now, you're going to see his fight. If you're watching this 5 years from now, you've missed it.
Yep.
And he's already fought, and he will get the win. And dude, will you please finish?
Yes.
Will you please finish this fight?
That's what we're going for.
Finish this fight.
Yeah.
Okay. I love you, bro. Thanks, man.
Love you too, man.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. Until next time. Ciao.
My people, it's time to move out. Move out. My people, it's time to move out. Show 'em what we do now. They say that work seems so hard to follow. I am not a role model, only a teacher. Teach 'em